Right, it is another episode of Steak and Banter, the first for 2026. Our guest on this one is YouM3. He was a returning guest. He was actually on not that even long ago, maybe like 4 or 5 months ago or something. I won't find some occulted way to make a reference to him being a basic pitch on Flashpoint or whatever it was I did last night. We've already done that one. We've already worked for the great material on that one. We'll just say he's the commentator, analyst, figure in the scene, etc. Welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I do podcasts, I do commentary, and occasionally I show up to an event, hopefully. So that's about as much as I can hope for. Okay. Even moving into this year, who knows?
Fair enough. I'm sort of like that, but I don't do commentary and I don't go to any of the events. So there you go. You're doing better than me, mate. You've got 2 out of 3 at least. I'm on 1 out of 3.
Just out of curiosity, YouM3, I mean, what you still casting full time with Tea Time, or are there other gigs sometimes?
I mean, me and Tea Time have a fairly semi-monogamous open relationship type thing, so I mean if one of us gets an offer and not both of us do, then they can obviously take it, right?
Sure.
But for the most part we still work together, primarily still largely focused on Asia stuff because that's our niche. So it's the easiest thing for us to get the foot in the door with.
Yes. I will say that is also one thing in the modern day that people are still silly about. Like, people have got to stop thinking of that old model of, like, there's the duos and you have to have your duo. Because what they forget is, like, you can only really force a duo like that when you're already both being hired and you're at the same sort of a level. And you can't do it when it's like you're both the people who'd be the third duo anyway, you know what I mean? And then also, the famous saying, the exception that proves the rule. Like, I won't even lie. I did tell... Let's just say, I'll just say Scrawny and Launders, because at least they can handle it, and also I know them enough. I won't say the other ones I did it to. Oh, I did tell some of them, let's just say privately, separately, like, get away from that guy, you've got to fucking just go the other route, get someone else, or you should just be an analyst, bro, what are you doing on these fucking, no one wants to hear you do 3-hour casts. Biggest casters in the world now, of course, doing all major finals. But again, that's the exception that proves the rule, because every other case I was right with all the people I didn't reference, because if you notice, I could reference them because they succeeded with all the other people and hurt their feelings because I was right and they fucking doomed their careers, sadly. And also, if in the modern day, that the reason that also doesn't work, mate, is because you've got fucking, in a world where you talk about the analogy is monogamy and being with a partner and building a relationship, you've got the ultimate fucking cougar whores out there of like Anders, Henry G, and Moses just all going, hey baby, you want to be part of my new duo? Like, so it's going to be really hard to have a duo if you're any good, mate. It's almost a bad side to leave you.
That's too good to refuse, really.
Listen,
so, I mean,
who wouldn't imagine that choice of 3 people? That's like some fucking, those dating shows back in the day where it's like, contestant number 1, what do you think? Inhuman reactions. Okay. Contestant number 2, I was the non-Sadicus part of my duo. Keep going anyway, whatever. All I want to say is, even though it says no relevant to anything, rest in peace, Sadicus. I won't say it gone too soon, because of the shit he did, probably gone quite late, actually.
Purely self-inflicted.
You have to understand,
there was
probably the only baseball player to ever get 10 strikes and then still on the 10th one when leaving the mound, not in the mound, that's where the pitcher is, but leaving the field, just go, this is bullshit. Even though it's like, it's not really, is it? Like, you actually go way more chance than everyone else. Like, it's actually someone reasonable the other way, mate, but okay.
That's kind of something that actually surprised me when I was reading. I don't know if people saw. I mean, it's like the front page thread about who remembers the OG casters.
Oh, right.
Reddit's just talking about their opinions on mostly Anders Semler, Sadicus, Henry G, whatever.
Sure.
That a lot of people actually were quite aware of the fact that they liked Sadicus, but they also feel like, from what they know, he definitely deserves to have been gone. And I'm going to just say, without leaking anything, there might even have been more stuff that just never saw the light of day. So if you already thought that was enough to get him excluded from the club, then, there's more reasons too.
Yeah. No, all I would say is this. I did at one point in time consider my friend. Look, I don't reach out to him nowadays, so I won't claim that now. All I'll say is this. That's how good he was at his job and how much people liked him doing it. Like, people, it's almost some political shit where, people will look the other way on some stuff. It's
almost like CS players when they're really toxic, but if they're also really good at the game, then you compromise a little bit.
No, by the way, that's even a great analogy, mate. His problem is he's simple, but he wants to be in Vitality. You know what I mean? Like, if Simple doesn't play the game anymore and now isn't considered as good, unfortunately, you don't get that insane ability to do anything you want in the match and go anywhere you want. Sadly, now that sort of catches up with you, doesn't it? Now you'd have to be a different person in some way. Because I do think one thing I'll never take away is I do think he was goated. He was fucking unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, okay, anyway.
Talented speaker.
I mean, he brought a lot of the mechanics that a lot of the modern casters still use. I would say that a lot of them have actually gotten better than him at those, if you actually listen back to his casts, then listen to what some of the guys today are doing. But nostalgia, hell of a drug.
And who's to say that any of them develop into that if they don't get the repetitions where he's not at those events, right? So,
by the way, that is also the other problem you have in light of the conversation you brought up of like the OG casters. Is, bro, when people think of the casters, they're not thinking of them casting the game now. They're thinking of all their like youth when they were watching, which obviously has a nostalgic element. Then they're thinking of the great teams like Virtus Pro versus Fallen SK. So the real problem is you can't beat him with the modern day guy, can you? Because that hasn't become as legendary yet. The years haven't passed by, and also if the person's saying it's 28. They're not fucking 18 and wide-eyed and experiencing everything for the first time again, are they? If anything, what we have to do is we have to be like the parents, where people say one of the joys of being a parent is the idea you get to experience the world through their eyes again. We should almost just listen to these idiots and just go like, oh, wow, yes, Shiro's like your device, isn't he, guys? Oh, my God, it's crazy. He's not that aggressive, but he's good. We should just do that, I guess. Just enjoy what the kids are into.
Well, that's the thing. In Tier 2, bringing up some of the old guys that are maybe sleeping around a little bit, but in Tier 2, some people are having to compete with Bardolph, DDK.
Yeah, exactly.
Vince, Anders, for positions in some of like the finals.
The old boys club, as I call it, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, well, we understand they have legacy, but it's like, should we be competing for the same jobs? I'm not so sure.
Anyway, speaking of competing for CCTs with fucking Bardolph and DDK, let's get into this episode, shall we? Let's get into it. So, as usual, we always start with the guest. Yumi, what is good at the moment? What do you like?
Well, this is almost a follow-up to my last... I think I had a bad point last time around where, like, Tier 2 almost felt a little dead in the water. And I'm just... my good point, I guess I'll start with, is that StarLadder and some of the other premier organizations are actually having discussions about building a Tier 2 circuit again.
Okay.
And people will see there's a lot of newer players that are coming in. We still had last year teams organizers like Mesa or Sky Esports that sort of filled that void. But right now, I mean, a lot of the smaller LANs are essentially what we would have used to consider Tier 3 LANs that have essentially been promoted by a void of actual...
Oh, it's the idea that these would be LANs. It wouldn't just be online tournaments, is the notion.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
From my understanding.
Right. Okay.
So there's... I think I just wanted to start on a positive because it seems like there's some additional attention. It's also maybe an identification that there is a gap in the market at all these premier organizers focused on big explosive events trying to capture market share, and the gap that's been created in Tier 2, I think is actually a good opportunity for them to retain some of that viewership, also build a narrative into their circuit better, as opposed to just relying on, hey, they won this CCT Cup that all those months ago, and that's why they could come in as favorites coming into this event as a sort of, or like an underdog. I like that there's, I guess, a more consistent ladder, because it felt like we were missing a couple of rungs running up coming out of 2025. So I hope that is a trend that carries forward, and it's a sustainable business model, because that seems to be what everyone is talking about. All these organizers, is it a sustainable business model? That's why we have things like impacts. It's sort of being axed. That's the justification they'll give.
Okay, wait. So I just want clarification before I make a take on this. So
Sure.
It's the StarLadder. Did PGL announce a Tier 2 LAN thing? I saw the StarLadder one for sure.
I don't think PGL have necessarily... PGL are in a weird spot where I think because they also run CAC, I don't think they're going to be incentivized to run Tier 2 LANs, because as much as CAC is built up as like a big premier or tournament, it doesn't always attract like the big heavy hitters, and so that is essentially their like Tier 2 LAN, unfortunately, even if it is. I think, I mean, with the prize pool, it should justify the extra appearances, so to speak.
I mean, the fact that even StarLadder is doing a Tier 2 LAN tournament series is pretty exciting, in that I think, what is it? You have to invite teams. The highest ranked team, I think, is 16th. If that's kind of what you're going for, I feel like that's something that we've obviously been missing, and I feel like it's actually it's extremely apparent when looking at some of the invites from last year. I mean, there's tournaments like the Blast Rivals that are just hyper exclusive, where it's just 8 teams that are invited off of VRS top 4 in the world VRS, plus then representatives from individual regions, but it is just the top team from those regions. And reminder, one of those is usually just Europe, so it's almost just like you're getting the top 5 teams that are invited. So to have events, I feel like this is exactly what's needed for VRS to be functional, because in version 1.0 of VRS, which was kind of, in my opinion, last year, I felt like what was lacking is there just wasn't the mobility. I remember coming up on some show, and after 3 months, there was a change of maybe only 4 teams in the top 24, essentially like the move-ins and move-outs. But with tier 2 lands that actually start at a rank 16 invite and down, well, now you have way more mobility for teams who kind of don't really have a great chance to punch up into the major qualification range. And that's just so paramountly important to have a healthy scene, or else you just kind of have these same rosters that are just kind of barely treading water, and then they get a major invite, but at the major invite, because they'll win some BO1s and that, then their rank will shoot up again. And then it just kind of feels like they're holding on for dear life when they have had no semblance of a season that even is, I would even say, qualifying you for really having a top 24 spot in our space. So yeah, in general, tier 2 lands I can get behind completely.
Yeah, I mean, we still have a couple of smaller organizers running around, but I think the important thing for me is that, when I see a tier 2 team do well at one of these tournaments, when they're run by an actual organizer that will run a bit more stringent admin controls and, the loading of SSDs. For a lot of these guys that are getting started and don't have that experience, it's a good way to soft launch them going into a tier 1 event if they justify that ranking as well, because the void between how these tier 3 lands were run versus how tier 1 lands is, it's a different experience. So I just like that there's a progression visibly for the players primarily.
But so I do like that this will hopefully exist, because I have always said the thing that I do think never came back after the online era, which I think was sad, was the proper DreamHack Open type lands. Like at the moment, ignoring when tournaments just got limited by teams choosing not to attend with all that shenanigans last year, all the big events now are basically all million bajillion prize pools, the same exact teams because of VRS, and then you just change out 2 people at the bottom. And the problem is then the gap became just play online cops. It was only in the second season that people even really mastered this whole meta, because VRS changed it. You can go to Birchland and Draculan, and it wasn't just the odd Fragadelphia. So the problem was, while it was cool to have those as lands, because they're still better than CCT in online tournaments, they clearly did not meet the professional standards of what a LAN would look like. Essentially, what we want this to be is the LAN environment would be very similar to a proper big event. It's just the teams would be lesser. That's what I think most people want, which is what this looks like it could be, by the way, if it is indeed PGL and Starlight are the ones doing it. So I just think to myself, because the problem is, even though on the one hand, yes, it's quaint that everyone goes, oh, Fragadelphia has old BYOC vibes, and these other ones, yeah, but the problem is that also is what makes some of the results feel more scoffed. When I find out Fnatic lost to someone at Draculan, part of me just thinks is that one of those ones where it's just in a LAN cafe or something? How professional is the setup? Again, would the team that won that LAN, if I dropped them immediately in a tier 1 tournament, would they even survive in that? Would they know how it all works? Would it be different? And there was even that story online, if people saw it. I forget if it was an Eternal Fire player at the end of last year. It was during the major. During the major, there was a LAN, which we might remember when I have to say this statement, where it was I think it was DreamHack. I think it was DreamHack Winter at in the end of November or something. And the joke is there was a player who went there who'd never been to a DreamHack, one of those seasonal ones that's in Jönköping. And so he did a tweet that was basically pleading with Valve, why is this a VRS LAN? There's music playing behind my thing.
There's a rave happening.
And I want to tell him,
yeah.
well, that is what the old, really old LANs like that were mate. The problem you have is essentially that's you've gone back in time for you, isn't it? You expect a professional sheen and certain things to be noise control to be a standard, and again the admins to step in if someone's behind you or something. The problem with that is, we don't have that a lot of these smaller LANs. That's the area where actually people do forget. People like ESL, PGL, but they don't just put on a LAN and put the prize money up and do the great camera work. They also have a level of professionalism from the base up. Some of it that will be invisible to people who aren't pro players. That is actually quite necessary. I mean, I can tell you, one of the areas I'm almost certain that teams have told those big names, the Fanatics and the Team Liquors that go to the small LANs, I think they've been told privately, don't flame the LAN too hard on Twitter. We need to come to this and not be, because mate, you know what those pros are like. They used to flame over the wrong brand of water was the joke. You know what I mean? mean? Or like the amazing shuttle, which, by the way, I'll just point this out to pro players. You do know the TO is under no obligation to give you a shuttle and things like that. Like in an actual sane sport, your team would pay for all that. What are you talking about? Like that wouldn't be part of the team. But again, you all still complain. So my point is, it's a bit convenient to me they didn't complain about most of the things at those lands and having to eat the same Donna wrap or whatever, Durham wrap every fucking 2 matches, no catering and stuff. All the things they used to in the fancy big world. Lastly, also, by the way, the other reason why I hope this is legit is I hope that it isn't only teams that are trying to like sneak VRS points in that meta. Because the one other thing about those lands that did make them not as good is it would always be a field of like, it's like 2 teams that are here for the VRS and the rest are just local and small teams. What we also miss is the DreamHack Open Fields too. Like in my dream world, this LAN would basically be like the top end of CCT, but a LAN. So it'd be all the teams that aren't in the current top 20x or whatever, but there'd be like 10 of them. And then we'd really also get, because remember, that's what people really mean by the RMR. They don't really mean like, I want the old system where fucking like Vitality has to qualify for the major. What they mean is I want like a cool LAN environment where it's the best of the rest and I get to see how do they stack up against each other. Not, did you do slightly better at Draculan while I did not as good at Birchland, which is like, no one likes that equation. It just doesn't feel sexy, does it?
And some of these sort of tier 3, I guess, promoted to tier 2 lands, some of them actually embrace the sort of, we're actually just one table apart, sitting opposite to each other, and we can almost hear the other person's comms on the other side, and there's an element of that that's alluring, old school LAN cafe vibes, but that shouldn't be how tier 2 is operated. That's a tier 3 that's very grassroots, and it's an authentic gaming experience, but it's, if we're talking about VRS and implications for the major, then there should be a sheen and a polish.
But so I'll give you the analogy, Yumi. If people follow English football, the system we have, the Premier League and the Championship, one of the best things about it is if you drop down from the Premier League to the Championship, there are some teams there that were Premier League teams or just had formerly big fan bases where their stadium will still be really good. Like if you go to like Middlesbrough Stadium or Leeds or something, when these teams are in Championship, they'll still have like a legit environment. It's not like playing in the FA Cup, the third round, where you just go to some like non-league team and you're like, holy fuck, there's like a guy with his dog next to the fucking like the edge of the pitch and there's no stands, they look like the stands are from 1940 or something like that. That's what we've got now is the equivalent of the FA Cup team, unfortunately, for the second line. We haven't got it's still just professional, but one step below. So by the way, I think this is actually a pretty good point. There's not really any downside to it. Sounds good. Sounds excellent. And also, let's just throw it out there, in a world where we now literally have like Simple last year and Device now potentially having to play online tournaments at some point in their career, I'd also like them to have lands that they could go to that are also like kind of good as well. Sure. And they would also bring mad numbers, mate. The joke is, if you actually had all these at the end of last year, you'd have had Simple at fucking these tier 2 lands and playing against whoever he played against that JW and Seven Licious or whatever he was playing at that random Swedish land where they even lost. You remember, but we don't talk about the Seven Licious one, do we Simple? Although he did win that game, I think, but whatever. Anyway, it's basically losing to a literal sandwich maker. That's why Simple, you can't complain. You picked the sandwich, Simple. You picked the sandwich. You can't complain that one. I'm combining memes there. Okay, let's go on then. Maui, what is your good point?
Mine is, of course, I mean, it's self-serving, but I think this is actually just good for the scene, okay? I feel like, I think that it's really great that PGL's Cluj event is finally getting good teams for a variety of reasons. I mean, the main selling point here is that Vitality is attending their first PGL event since the Copenhagen Major. And just for reference here and why this is good, I mean, just so people know, I mean, PGL ran 4 tournaments in 2025. They ran 2 events in Bucharest. They ran Cluj and Astana. And only in a single tournament at Astana did they ever get more than one top 5 team. And by the way, in most of those tournaments, it's just the 5th ranked team on HLTV that I'm referring to. But Astana had Spirit and it had Navi. This time around, if you look at HLTVs, Cluj has the teams ranked 1 through 7. And if you even look at the top 10, the only team that they're missing is Spirit. So this is this now becomes a huge tournament, and one that I feel like in a lot of ways PGL has really earned, because the events that they've been running have, 1, been incredibly smooth, but 2, I think the format is extremely competitive. I think the sort of Swiss group stage into a single elim 8-team playoff bracket is kind of exactly what I like to see nowadays for top tier tournaments. It's what resembles the major. except for the fact and the good fact that it's all BO3s in that Swiss stage. So I feel like this is great for PGL. I think it also sets up the idea that PGL could parlay this into Cluj becoming their prestige event. If they keep running it over multiple years, it could be the event that, rivals the Cologne, rivals the, I guess, IEM Poland event until we know what Krakow is going to be next year. And so this is something that we've also had as a discussion topic, is that why can't a TO like Blast or PGL make something that also is regarded as a prestige event in the calendar, and so that ESL doesn't really, it's not like there's a monopoly necessarily. It's almost just by virtue of the fact that the other TOs haven't gone out and done it. But this is starting to read like PGL's going out and doing it. I mean, they're getting the teams. They've actually adhered to the desire from those teams to have a club share prize, and now the teams are all coming back in. And so this overall, I mean, there's more, there's just, if they can actually continue to do this, I feel like it'll finally just give a little fight back. And I also, in a way, just kind of find it extremely necessary. I just think that the calendar could be padded out a little bit more, especially in a weird year like this, where it's hard to say what the fourth prestige event is, because as of right now, it sucks that Spirit isn't at this one, because then we could just say this is the fourth prestige event. But I guess we'll wait and see if any tournament other than the two majors and Krakow include all top 10 teams.
Yeah, I agree with you on all fronts. The fact that PGL are able to get an event that they can start to carve out a legacy for themselves with is important for them as a company, but also it'll be just be cool to have another event like that on the calendar. I think cynically, when I look at this and I see the amount of teams that didn't attend PGL events last year and then are now attending them, this is part of where PGL have earned it, is that they did actually buckle to some of the demands of these teams and players, saying, hey, we need team share and there needs to be some sort of splitting of revenue. But I think there was also just a sort of lingering loyalty, and I don't know if this was sort of discussed behind closed doors or not, but it did seem like there were just some teams where even after PGL made those changes, they still just didn't go to those events. And I don't know if that was because either they'd already planned out their calendar for the year because of some of the issues with PGL very, very early on or not, but there was, you could tell that they were just avoiding PGL like the plague. If there was ever an overlap with an ESL event, or even just like a couple of days buffer between a PGL to an ESL event, they'd always prioritize ESL events. But this is actually not only coupled with the Cluj angle, Vitality attending, they're also not attending ESL Pro League, which is, there's a decent amount of runway actually between those events, because they'd be a stage 2 invite. So it is quite curious to see them sort of I guess betray ESL in that way, but I do agree. I think there's a lot of positives to PGL having an event that allures and brings in all these premier organizations.
I'll just start on that last point. Like, I do like the sort of, again, I got to experience the newer caster there, like that analogy at the beginning. I like the naivety of him, like, maybe they were just, there was lingering loyalty to ESL. YouM3, it's implied behind the scenes, mate, there was just open corruption.
Yeah,
and that,
well...
ESL sort of told people, like, we're in a little cartel, don't attend PGL, fuck PGL, Yeah, true, okay, I get it. But, so essentially, I think you are right, by the way. In fact, I'll even throw this out there. That is even the point, since you said it at the very end, that I was going to add in, which is, it's not even just as significant as like, wow, PGL got all the top teams, including Vitality. Bro, then Vitality and FaZe or whatever skipped Pro League. That actually, that's almost as historic, because that allows me to now do my fucking Star Wars prequel meme of like, begun the TO wars have. Because there wasn't one last year. See, ESL just won it, mate. It's why actually I keep making this point on Twitter and to people in general. The most underrated detail about the ZWOO versus Donk thing is, ZWOO and Vitality only attended the absolute best events last year. They didn't have a single sort of scuffed or smaller thing. They didn't have one, whereas this will help me cycle back round to the problem that PGL had last year, right? The two teams that show, no matter what you say otherwise, no matter how happy people are and how they say, oh great, that PGL paid us quickly. So here's how you know last year people didn't respect PGL, no matter the prize purse, as like they did even the Blasts of the world. Because the teams MOUZ and Falcons both won a PGL in season 1, and people used to say, MOUZ don't even win tournaments. Well, I guess they got that one won PGL, but no one cares. And then for Falcons, because Morrissey wasn't there, he was on G2 on the other side, they would just flat out say they haven't won a trophy. So it's like, the joke is everyone saw those wins and was like, I'm just going to delete that out of my brain to make space for the next cool ESL/Blast tournament. Like, fuck this event. So
we won a tournament, but Dexter got the MVP. Now we're just discarding that one, actually.
It's why I actually say earlier, like, that's the other problem you have with those sorts of events, is like you could just tell people didn't respect them in the same way. And unfortunately, if you know about the industry side and even what's been said publicly, that wasn't supposed to be the DreamHack Open replacement, etc. That was supposed to be literally the biggest prize pool tournament in fucking Counter-Strike, because every tournament was $1 million, remember? And it was supposed to, people will forget this, it wasn't going to be Astana. It was originally going to be like, what was that one? Like South, wasn't that like Argentina or something? Wasn't that like Buenos Aires or something crazy? There was going to be like, again, like
it was going to be a South American.
It was going to be some
Buenos Aires,
world-spanning circuit as well, which is actually stepping outside the boundaries of PGL, doing it, in their local region or Sweden or whatever, So that was big. I also think now, like I say, now we actually have a proper circuit where there can be some parity between the big three. It's not just ESL first, Blast second by default, and then PGL doesn't get the teams. Like, basically, PGL was almost like being handcuffed, where they weren't allowed to compete because they'd done everything else they could. I even think their desk choices are quite interesting. They obviously clearly contrasted directly against what ESL has done, whereas everyone else just copies ESL, don't they? So I like the idea we actually have competition now. Then also, I'll throw it out there, I do think, by the way, I'll tell you one last reason as well, and this is actually pure fucking banter. I'll tell you the last reason why teams didn't respect it as much. Does anyone remember? Maybe you don't. What I think is one of the most hilarious social media, like you made the rake and then you came back and forgot about it and stepped on it, which is when Falcons did win the first PGL Bucharest, that Aurora account, which tries to meme, made fun of them and was like, all you did is win like a PGL Bucharest. Then later, the only event Aurora won was PGL Bucharest, the other one. And so everyone just donked on them like, you made that rake and then put it out there and then forgot it was there and then stood on it like, holy. Because think about it, right? By the way, spoiler, social media people, if you're a team that doesn't win any lands, I wouldn't maybe denigrate any lands in the tier one scene, you fucking idiot, think it through. Like, it's already a mad shit talking angle anyway. But I'm speaking to not even the crowd, just people who don't even understand English, just fucking 16-year-old Zoomers like, but I get to press buttons on the Twitter account. Lord, this is all their careers now. Enter. Like, that's just the world we're in, where they all represent everyone with a fucking idiot Zoomer, but it's all good. Anyway, then there's also the fact that, like, PGL did also have all these other areas that they did a better job than people like ESL and Blast. Like, first of all, their prize pool was bigger. Originally, they even made theirs less of the club share than ESL did. If people don't know, the original ESL ones were cynical as fuck, because they would say they had a prize purse of millions, and then the prize purse for the players would be like 300k. And it was like the majority just went to the teams. Well, my problem with that is, why are you making the private part of the business what you pay the teams all public? Because you're trying to pretend like your event is as big, but we all know that prize purse, when we see it announced, is only supposed to be cool because the player wins that. It's not supposed to be that, like, oh, great news is all got loads of money. People care about the idea that, like, Zimu wins millions, not fucking Neo from, it was actually the name of the Order of Vitality. People don't know the CEO or whatever. They don't care about what he makes, do they? Who gives a fucking shit? And then lastly, this basically, I actually said this on Twitter because people won't know. This is why, for me, it feels like PGL only begins now as a chance to be the best TO. Because PGL already ran those lands years and years ago, only had majors before last year, people will forget it was back in 2015 that they actually had lands in an old circuit where they used to have all the top teams attend. After that, they just had majors because they were mainly doing Dota, if people remember, and they were out with CS for a long time. And then last year, obviously, they were scoffed. And as you guys just pointed out, they never got anywhere close to the top teams. This is how you know it was actually, in my opinion, like a conspiracy behind the scenes. Because, like you said, it would be like one top 5 team and it would always be number 5. Bro, if they'd have even had like Vitality at one of those lands, it doesn't matter if the other top 4 don't attend, that changes totally the way people think about it. If you'd have even had the 3rd best team at the time that attended, that also changes everything. Yes, I think it's pretty significant. And also, as pointed out, I'll just circle back again, the fact that this is now causing people to consider maybe there's actually an ESL event I think I'll skip. That is fucking world changing. That's when everything changes. Because think about it, right? What that's going to do, even though part of me, as both an elitist and I just want to see comparative play, part of me does want it to be like Formula One, where everyone attends all the big stops, and that's what the circuit is. Kind of what like Vitality did last year. The problem is, there's going to be now way too many lands that are at this top level, so teams are going to pick and choose now. And by the way, you'll also probably see it get tied into VRS. And once some teams have qualified and they feel like they're already at the point they're going to be at the major anyway, some of them will just bail on a last tournament if they're in that position potentially.
I mean, we had people step away because of mental health and burnout last year, which I think I'm very sympathetic to. Because I mean, if you looked at, say, the Mongols, for example, and the amount of lands that they competed in 2024, they leapfrogged that by the middle portion of the year in terms of total maps played on LAN, and that was at S tier events and big events where they have to grind boot camps. And I could understand why some players step away from that and maybe don't feel great. But yeah, it is strange to see that priority shift. And the only teams that ever really broke the coalition, though, from ESL, did seem to be in positions where they needed a win, either to justify their VRS ranking or retain position, or maybe the team was, burned out in confidence. That's why you saw teams like MOUZ attend those events. You saw Navi a couple of times as well. These were in downward trajectory periods of those teams, and they needed something to sort of spur them back on. That's why, as well, I mean, Aurora will look back at that Bucharest and go like, oh yeah, it's such a fond memory. We're ramped up into the major, and then it just doesn't materialize, right?
Okay, right, I will do my good point now. I actually will say, being as everyone's pointed out, it's been a fairly humdrum roster mania. We didn't get all the giant world shaking moves, especially because remember, people have to remember that Spirit one was done so quickly and already at the end of last year was announced that that doesn't to me count as part of the roster mania. Everyone's already given all their takes on that on all the shows and done all the videos, etc. So I'm thinking more of it's only the smaller moves. I actually think one of the smaller ones that went a little bit under the radar is, I'm going to say, I think the Ken guy going to NIP. The guy used to play for the
Inner Circle.
Yeah, there you go. Inner Circle, the former TNL squad, which was a really good online team. If people remember, and obviously had those odd results at I think it was Pro League or something towards the end of last year. If anyone watched their team, first of all, he clearly was the best player or one of the best players on their team. Secondly, I actually think that's a good example of you didn't just pick up an up-and-coming player. You picked up a player to do the role you want, where he's going to do the U-Jerks role in NIP. And then thirdly, if you saw NIP at that major, NIP clearly was one of the teams that still had a bit of potential untapped. They lost all those OT games and they could have been another stage further in the tournament. They looked like they had some positives. I noticed a lot of the analysts enjoyed watching them. So to me, that is one of the teams where I do like the idea you've done what on paper looks like a minor upgrade. It could give you a little bit more punch and power. You've already got, I think, again, what I think is the meta in CS still is having aged IGLs that are just mega veterans and have worked with everything and seen everything, and they can sort of handle the back and forth. I actually think NIP again can be a sort of a little sleeper team. They can actually make further progress and go up the rankings. And also, I think you look at that team, it's quite an interesting put together squad. I like the way it's been GM. So I think this is actually a good move. I don't think there's much downside to it. I think it's actually a pretty slam dunk pickup. Seems like it was done at the right time. Doesn't sound like it cost millions and bazillions and wrecked them in that sense. So actually, bearing in mind, people have generally been fairly I'd say negative about NIP until those matches at the major where they were getting the results. I kind of like the position they're in now. I've always hoped that project would kind of get online and get to the lands and be relevant again.
Yeah, leading into the major, there were a lot of sort of external factors that seemed to haunt NIP, and that seemed to be, children being born and players having to take some time away from boot camps or maybe not attend certain events. And so maybe the criticisms ahead of the major were a little rash, just because of the trajectory they had from the start of the year to even make it into the major cycle. There are a lot of teams that miss out on that.
Sure.
So the fact that NIP were in that position is something we can only accredit them for. I think the Karen move is interesting because, play style wise and the way the Inner Circle like to play isn't really conducive. There's not a lot of transferable skills, I would say, aside from he is a good shooter. And I watched the NIP game, I think yesterday against Liquid. Yep. And there definitely seemed to be some moments where, Karen almost wasn't familiar, wasn't used to the types of responsibilities that he would have to bear with a team of NIP's nature. I think there was a lot more self-sacrifice, keep swinging to have impact types of plays that Inner Circle would make, where NIP almost need a more tempered, still heavy-hitting sort of hand. I mean, obviously, if you put someone like Frozen in his spots, he's going to do well because Frozen's exceptional. But there's a level of temperance that I'm not sure Cairn quite has demonstrated on his previous teams that has me... I'm sure he could grow into it. That's something that he could develop, but it does leave a little bit to be desired at the initial, outings with NIP.
I'm not necessarily 100% sold that this is gonna upgrade NIP. I know it's a slight upgrade in terms of as a player, but kind of I mean, I covered the game yesterday that they played, and I looked at just how many spots had to change to make it so that Karen could slot in, and I was kind of shocked at what NIP did on their ancient CT side. So, for context here, Ujerks was their B site anchor on when he was playing ancient, and Shush is the A site anchor. However, Karen was the A site anchor when he was playing on his last team. And so instead of just saying, okay, you know what, Karen, you're going to take Ujerks as spotted B, they moved everybody around. They changed everybody practically. They made Kaspersky play Cave, even though he was playing middle. They made Snappy play B, even though he's playing Cave. And they made Karen for the first time in in the last year, play middle, even though he was an A-side anchor. And so that's cause for concern for me. Because I noticed Kaspersky looked worse yesterday than, because it was almost hard to find fault with Kaspersky when he was playing for NIP in the last 3 months. Like almost every team he played against, regardless of their world ranking, even like top 12 teams in the world, he would just put up a 1.2. Like it was astounding, truly, how consistent and how good he was. But now he actually looked pretty mortal, and he looked kind of error prone, and he didn't really take the fights that I feel like he was the best at, because Cave has kind of weirdly become a spot for a lot of IGLs and kind of older players, because you're kind of like you're doing this little battleship smoke spam and stuff, and you're trying to do all these little tricks, playing off of timings around the smoke, and eventually you'll usually have to make a gambly push through the smoke on either the left or right side to help your lane players or your mid players. I don't really want Kaspersky to take risks. I just want him to take fair 50-50 fights, and for him to have just clean fights at that. So the fact that they moved him away from that is something where I'm going to keep my eye on. Are they going to move him back after a month or two? But as a whole, I think this is maybe a 15% upgrade for NIP. I wish I could have gotten more on board with it, but it also, on T side of Nuke, I was also concerned because Ujerks was really tricky at taking outside yard space on Nuke. I didn't think that he was a pro. Like this, that's one map where I was like, oh, he needs to play like this. It's kind of ridiculous. It's like they would throw the variety of outside cross smokes, and then Ujerks would just, I'm sure it was drawn up by Snappy, don't get me wrong, a lot of the time, but he would push through into either big garage or push into that kind of unbreakable box to the left, or sometimes sneak into mini. Like he had all of those ideas, and he knew he could kind of read the game live so that he could slink in and find these nice backstabs. Like he got a lot of easy kills, but Karen never really went for those fights outside. He never really actually knew when to push smokes, because it's risky. You don't want to, in your first game for NIP, just start walking through smokes. And then it forced Snappy to start calling for A hit after A hit after A hit. And for the last 4 rounds of the half, it was all just A hits, because he just couldn't trust Karen to, or maybe he just didn't want Karen to walk through smokes at outside as selflessly as Ujerks did. So I think Karen is a better player, but I don't know in the setup of NIP if he's going to be good for them until they really get rolling, which could take up to 2 or 3 months.
Put it this way, let me ask a question to clarify to YouM3 here, right? For people who don't know, the TNL team was actually shit hot online. Like they were actually one of those teams that was like really right. So to me, the reason why I picked this as a good one is I do think fans get sick of people doing moves. Let's say maybe some famous teams have done this recently, where you pick up a person who used to be amazing, but he was either in CSGO or it was only online a million years ago. Like the thing here is people want like the up and coming talent to get picked. Like this was one of the best online players in the world in theory, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely, within that inner circle team, it was between him or Dawu, and both of them were very much sort of instigator, but play on their own sort of tempo players. I didn't think inner circle necessarily always had a very cohesive style. I didn't see lots of flash plays to set up early positioning on maps. It was more play like a slower tempo, but out-duel and out-frag a lot of these players that we're up against. So, yeah, I mean, Karen was definitely in that conversation. I wouldn't dismiss this pickup at all. I think it's just for the fit that NIP are going for, and for the type of player that they're replacing, it did feel like a little bit of a mismatch. But again, I think there's credit to players to adapt. And I think Karen deserves that opportunity as well, because I think there are many that have tried to adapt and taken years of their career adapting to a position that never was really meant for them. I'm still unsure about whether or not Karen can sort of fit that mold, because he's such a prospect. So
I'll also just throw it out there. The other reason why I'm actually like quite confident this is a good move is because, as far as I can tell, it's a snappy choice. And if people don't know, based on conversations I've had behind the scenes, it wasn't the Ents GM and it wasn't Saw who actually scouted all those players when Snappy was in Ents. It was actually Snappy, I've heard. I've heard it was actually him specifically, and that he is an IGL that will go, and he doesn't just do that thing of like, oh, you got me this player. Like, he goes and checks out the people and goes, hey, maybe we can get this guy on endpoint or this guy on some small team. So to me, I think Snappy saw, and he was in that circle of like this, where this team was, and this is the player he decided he wanted. So again, I'm sort of seeing that if his stamp of approval's on it, then I'm in for the ride. I'm a Snappy fan.
The only Snappy project that's ever really failed and fully flopped was Falcons, and that's when he didn't pick a team. So
no, that's a good point. And by the way, just to belabor the point in case people didn't follow the end of CSGO, sorry, he was, if that is true that he did the scouting and he was sort of like the crypto GM, then he was fucking really good at it, because if people don't know, he was finding like HLTV top 20 players when they weren't HLTV top 20 players, put it that way. Like, he was bringing through a lot of really good players. And by the way, people who, some of them haven't even been that good without him. There's another thing as well. Like, it looked like his effect on them was significant. So I always like IGLs who know what they want, and they bring in the right sort of player, you know, and then elevate them to another level. Okay, Maui, that's enough of listening to me say good things for now. But if someone wants to listen to the rest of the show or next week's episode, what might they do?
Well, first thing I have to say is that this message is indeed sponsored by Raycon, who, for the New Year's, have their essential open earbuds, which are great because it's actually open back earbuds, which is something that I didn't feel like really was on the market all too much. But in terms of just being able to just hear the world around you as you're carrying out everyday tasks, it's a really unique experience, one that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around, if I'm being completely honest. But I will sell you on the ideas that of where I use Raycon earbuds, which is that battery life is just absurdly good. The fact that I can use the same earbuds for 8 hours straight, and so frequently they are promoting their open back earbuds, but I've been using the everyday earbuds classics, which are still on their website as well, and they are having a site-wide sale this January, and you can go to buyraycon.com/snakeopen to get 20% off site-wide. So honestly, do you want to actually try a new listening experience with open back earbuds, or do you want to just stick with the classics, get the Raycon Everyday Earbuds Classics? So if you are interested in either of these and having just a ridiculous amount of battery life, crisp, clear audio, having a charging case that every 10 minutes you have it in there, you're getting 90 minutes of battery life. Like, it's just so easy. I feel like that's the main thing for me versus other earbuds I've used where I need to put them in the case for quite some time, need to wait for them to charge up. I mean, these are just perfect for me on airplanes, especially where I just need to zone out, watch movies, listen to podcasts for extremely long periods. And if they do happen to run out, if I didn't charge it overnight, then, well, it only takes me 10 minutes to get nearly 2 hours. So check them out. Go to www.buyraycon.com/snakeopen to get 20% site-wide off.
Okay, we will now move to the section of the show where, I mean, the joke is you guys shit all over my good point, but whatever. We'll move to the ones where we intentionally shit all over the points and say everything's bad and all agree. It's not us that are wrong, it's everyone else in the industry. Whatever. What's the bad thing right now, YouM3, in the industry?
I think Valve's directing of the game and their philosophy is terribly misaligned. And again, I'll harken back to my last appearance on this show. I was actually very positive about Valve's changes, the small updates that they kept continuously doing, some of the changes to the economy. It felt like they were a little bit more active in making tweaks to maps or optimizations. And we felt like we got an update every very, very often. But not only do we get zero content, we also have the maps being removed at weird periods in sort of the map pool, to have train removed. Listen, I love Anubis, but if there was going to be a map replaced, it shouldn't have been train. And I think the problem I have is that Valve understand that they It feel well. Let me just clarify. I think Valve are motivated similarly to a company that has shareholders that they're beholden to.
Okay.
When Valve simply don't. You know, I could almost understand why Valorant or League of Legends pitches and pushes skins or tries to promote all these activations with players, so to speak. For Valve, I mean, I don't think they need to necessarily push as hard for that because they not only generate a lot of the money, but they don't necessarily have to create the skins. They don't have to create a lot of the content that they do put out.
Yes.
And they understand that their player base didn't like Train before. How did they want to change that? They soft launched a practice smoke throwing map for Train to try and get people on board with learning the map and learning the smokes that received 0 updates. The smokes didn't even always land based on the lineups that they created. You know, if I truly believed that Valve tried to get people engaged with Train, it actually would have been through that as a vehicle and maybe actually having like a tutorial mode that you could move on other maps. But there was just total non-development. So I just think that they tried to take the easy way out where they're like, oh, guys, people don't like Train again, so we're just going to remove it. And it is the plebs. It is the general MM player that doesn't want to play Train. And I get it. You know, it's not a great map to pug if you don't know what you're doing. But it seemed like Valve could have made a more conscious effort to get those people on board. And you're never going to get those people on board when you have as many very pug-friendly maps that you do have in the pool. You know, people didn't learn Nuke overnight. It took years and many iterations for people to start playing that map, even in a pugging capacity, because they didn't know the utility. And they, to some effect, they still don't. So I just wish that Valve would make a more conscious effort. It feels like they're sort of... I approve a lot of the smaller updates, but I think they're also maybe too quick-handed to remove things that the community seems to not like, instead of trying to get people on their side of it.
If Valve really wants to hold our hands with smokes, just make easier lineups. I don't even feel like this is a crazy take. I mean, the Valorant's pick up and play ease comes from not needing to know lineups, because when you're Brimstone, you just get out an iPad, you just click on the map. If you're Omen, you literally see a 3D sphere of where your smoke is exactly going to land. And you still add so much tactical value to your team when you're playing as those characters. But if I'm playing Train, and I didn't play Train all that much, but I know about what you're talking about, the fact that they had the whole grenade smoke sort of training warm-up thing.
Yeah.
I mean, within a week, there were better smokes that had easier lineups on Nard Out Here's channel. So either just redo, like you're saying, like update that sort of smoke mini game or whatever you want to call it, the training warm-up, or just I don't think, I mean, it's so funny that I feel like the competitive scene sometimes, like I remember when I was competing a lot and even playing with just friends more recently, sometimes people would say, oh, do you think Valve put that there? And it's literally a splotch that's like 30% bigger than the other splotch to the left of it. It's like, no, they honestly are not thinking about any of these textures at all. They're practically just random, and we're just coping with the fact that, yes, it's maybe marginally easier to see this lineup than the last one. Just make actually easy lineups to see. I don't think it actually upsets the competitive integrity of the game at all, or changes the skill ceiling or floor all that much. If you know that some smokes are going to be essential for a new map you're trying to integrate, just put a light bit of, I don't know, a yellow graffiti X on the ground for where you need to stand, and put like a more obvious, colorful spot that you need to aim at, and nobody's going to mess it up. And then because you can hold their hand with that little extra just guide to throw the most essential smoke on the map, which everybody knows is essential. Well, now you're going to get a little bit more, the runway's a little bit easier for people. So onto the other point of just the way that they're going about map changes. Little aside here, I love Anubis. I'm actually glad to see it in the pool. I thought that it was really a poor idea with the CT economy buff to take it out at that point, because I'd say that the map is going to play out a lot more like a 6-6 half. You know, maybe it is still T-sided, so 7-5. I think that's reasonable, as opposed to more frequently we're getting 9-3 and 8-4s. So I feel like Train, though, just didn't get a fair chance. And I'm really disappointed in that, because it was clear, if you game planned extremely well on it, that you could outplay teams that had more skill than you. I know that people will reverse engineer the HLTV top 20 and say, but Navi was more skilled. They had more people in the top 30. Well, I mean, ranking and rating comes from having good tactics that give you easier kills. But if I put K Serato in a head-to-head aim map with with anybody on Navi, I'm going to take him over any of them. And if I even put Yekindar over them, I'm probably going to take him throughout a lot of those. I don't know. All I'm saying is that I just think that Train probably got done a little bit dirty here. I feel like if I'm trying to, for the tier 1 side of things, change things up, I probably would have taken out Mirage or Inferno at this point. But I get why they do what they do, but it does, like you're saying, just kind of feel like it's for the lowest common denominator, aka trying to appease shareholders, aka it's for the silvers.
Yeah,
I just feel like there's, I mean, even maps like Vertigo, right? For example, if you were going to remove a train, you would replace it with a map like Vertigo almost, just so that there's like a just so that there's like a tactical swap at least, because otherwise we just end up with flat, all-terrain dueling maps, which are like, I understand that that's good for skill expression in some capacity, but Counter-Strike is about more than that to me. Like, I like seeing the cool strategies and the niche smokes, the crazy lurks that people can pull off. That's what appeals to me especially. And even the playmaking that you can have in those silver lobbies by doing some of those plays on those maps is substantial, and that's fun. In my eyes. I understand I'm not everybody, but I just think that there has to be some tactical maps. There have to be elements where you have to learn that util. And your point about like they can make the lineups easier. Valve historically through their their single player games like Half-Life, there actually might be the best in the industry of sort of soft feeding you information about things just through terrain or through something that you see. Like Half-Life 2 was innovative in that sense of like, hey, we're adding a gravity module, and you have to use that to try and figure out some of these puzzles, and they didn't spoon feed it to you.
Yeah, but I would just say, but quickly before Thorin jumps in on this, I mean, if they keep going down this route of replacing the least played map with a map that people will play more, and Overpass comes out for cash, we'll just simply have the puggiest map pool ever. Like, I can't even really imagine. If you have Mirage, Dust 2, Ancient, Anubis, and Cash, well, I mean, Madra's gonna look like a genius. Like, that's, it's gonna be so, the CS we're gonna watch will be so simplistic.
Right, the couple of things. One, it's the idea that at the end that Yumi just snuck under the like fucking line, that he's like a secret Vertigo apologist who thinks the map.
I actually am, unfortunately.
Because what's mad is when he was like, why are we just having like air maps here? I'm like, well, they're Counter-Strike maps, mate. The problem with Vertigo is that's from some other video game I'm unaware of. Like, I don't even know what that map is to this day. So anyway, I do think though that it's relevant in the sense of like, I actually think one thing that Vertigo did to Counter-Strike was, you never had this before. Before that, if you ever went pre-Vertigo and you asked players, like one of those classic, I can't remember which betting company it was, but back in the day, there was that betting company that used to just like, ask all the players questions and do compilation videos. It's actually the meta everyone does now. If you'd have asked players back then, the joke was, most pro players just said whatever their permaban is the map that should be removed. Like, the joke is, Nico just every time said Overpass because he had all those fucking trauma. He probably just has all their memories from the Boston Major, like, where he's 1,000 miles and he shit the bed and could have won the major. So anyway, normally they were all just biased, right? But the joke of Vertigo is it allowed everyone to collectively hate on one map. And I do feel like every map that replaced it since Anubis Trade just gets the same hate. And this is why, by the way, I was actually going to put this as my ugly point. And this is why I was going to put it as ugly. Because I don't think it's totally bad. Like, spoiler, I'm like Maui, I actually prefer Anubis to Trade. So in that sense, I don't hate the move. But I do think the way it's done and what it implies is potentially negative or at least troublesome. Like, first of all, here's an example where pro players, you don't do yourself any favours here. I'll do a contrast between Train and Anubis, but in terms of how pros addressed this map. So what's funny is when this change has happened, you've seen quite a few pros complain online and be like I wanted Train in or whatever. Well, here's the problem, guys. You're all basically saying, which is quite rare for like the least played map, you really like the map. but you didn't show it in your Game Boys. Like, even most of the teams that were amazing on train, let it be the decider or just did the odd punish pick. It wasn't your home map pick. Even like the teams that really like it, like the Furies of the world, you were picking a lot of other maps too, mate. You were picking plenty of the normal maps too. So one, you didn't actually signal with your play that you liked it as much as you thought, because I do think train was quite limited, and I thought but to what you were also like referring to, another thing is as well, here's why train got done dirty, because I actually think train was an obvious map you should have done every 2 or 3 months some more tweaks to see if it made it more playable. Because remember, the architecture is similar to what the CSGO version was like, but it never played anything like the CSGO version. And in fact, I do think, unfortunately for me, I wouldn't even say it was stale. I think teams just struggled to come up with unique, different identities on the map. I think a lot of people just had a similar play style. And by the way, a lot of it is why when it was decided, it was at least exciting. It was just a lot of fragging. It was just a lot of people running out into the open and just taking mad duels. And is there a guy who happens to be here? Does someone flash you here? A lot of it was actually, I thought, sort of like incidental, accidental CS to some degree. I didn't think it was a great tactical map. I also don't think it lived up to being a great fragging map. I think it was actually kind of a bit of a tortured map in that regard. But here's the problem. Even though I actually somewhat, like, I thought Anubis had a charm. I didn't totally hate it. I understand why some people don't like certain aspects of it. I do think it's a lot better than Vertigo, personally. At least to watch. I don't know about to play. And then, but here's the problem. I'll contrast it. In the same way as loads of pros were like, but I like train. But it's like, but you were never picking it. Here's what's mad. Loads of pros at the end were like, yeah, Anubis sucks. But you all played the fuck out of it. Loads of you played it. So it's like, again, mate, I'm so sick of like having to do, which sadly is a secret to life, just ignore what a pro player says and see what he actually fucking does. Because as people say, like, actions are like reveal hidden preferences, whereas you can just claim all day long you do or don't like something, but then you don't ever actually do that thing to prove as much. Here's also why the Anubis edition is awkward, because of the timing. Like, everyone's just congratulated Valve. Valve, you've nailed it. You actually did that season thing we all wanted, where we start the season early on with one of the prestige events like a Kelowna or a Katowice, at least in the past model. Then we, at the end of the season, have the majors, so we all build up into that, and then the season's over and we have the player break. All we need now is just attach the map cycle to that. If this had been announced at like day one of the major, like, by the way, this is the last tournament for train. After this, by the way, we'll be moving to Anubis. So that means, by the way, the second you're eliminated from the major, you can stop playing fucking train. You can already get the start on whatever Anubis is in the pool, and also you can start thinking, by the way, when you do roster moves, what you do. Because I'll give you actually a funny example. Maui just referenced it. Even though in theory the number one team cheering for this edition should be Aurora, because that was one of their home maps and they were actually very good on it. Do you want to know the ultimate irony? That was easily one of Jota's best maps, by the way, and he just got kicked out the fucking team. So like, the joke is, you might even have just held off on that for a minute if you didn't know this was coming back. He was actually like one of the better players in their team on that fucking map, and they just booed him, and then 1 second later Val's like, lol, I'm about to do the funniest thing ever, and then like just back again in it. And also low-key, I now have had it confirmed. I thought it couldn't just be the Turkish thing and, you know, whatever he does as a captain. Now it turns out Valve themselves are rigging the game to keep Madger in this motherfucker. Okay, I see how it is, homie. Like you're saying, what next? Vertigo next, then Cash after that, is it? And what after that? Fucking Dust 1 or something. Fucking hell, mate. We're just going to, next up, just remove tactics entirely. Then there's the other thing, which Maui was doing, which is, here's where I'm different from Maui. I agree, all those things, this is why it's good in Valorant, would be excellent for the beginner or like the person who hasn't put much time into CS, because essentially that's actually the area Valorant has succeeded. It is Babby's first fucking tac shooter, and it is getting a lot like the kids compared to the old heads who play the CS, because you don't get that feeling of like, oh shit, because CS now on a smaller scale has the problem Quake does. When the Zoomer tries it, he goes, well, I'm getting wrecked because I haven't played this game for 10 years, and then all the nerds are fucking Ferrari peeking him and throwing the perfect smoke and doing all and it's like, fuck, when I can't have fun when I first play, whereas Valorant is a lot more sort of like, you just boot it up, you can already see what's happening. Here's why I don't like what he suggested though. Even though I get that you wouldn't have every lineup, I hate that sort of what I call like the Microsoft wordification of fucking programs, where it's like, I'm in the spawn and then Clippy just pops up like, hey, I see you're trying to throw the window smoke, aim a little bit to the left. Like, I'm supposed to do that, I'm the pro player, I'm the one who's supposed to get paid 50k a month to know that pixel lineup. Why are you telling me and showing me where to throw throw it, because that is the thing. If you notice, by the way, that is more of a Riot thing. I can tell you in League of Legends, one of the things they've done over the years is dumb down elements and remove complicated mechanics and make it simplistic. And at this point, almost tell you on screen, like, just do this shit now, please. Like, that's what. By the way, the FPS version would be COD, wouldn't it? That was the one that did the equivalent of those sorts of things too. And so, in general, I'm not as big a fan of that. But on the map one, that's why I was going to do it as my ugly for the map. Because even though I prefer Anubis, I actually get the vibe based on what they're saying that a lot of players are actually kind of pissed about this, and they wish Train had stayed or been given another chance or been reworked or something. Also, I'll just throw this out there. There's no rhyme or reason as to when Valve removed these maps. First of all, if people don't know, the egregious thing about Vertigo, the most unpopular map ever in pro play in the modern era, is it lasted something mad like 5 or 6 years, guys. Some crazy length of time. Meanwhile, think about when Anubis came out. It only had something like 2 years. Then it got removed. And then Train now has had something like, what, 1 year? Less than 1 year? That is, that's the part I don't get. Again, can we have like a consistent philosophy? Like, does that imply you think Train was way worse than the others and had to be removed early? Like, why couldn't it be reworked or something? There's another thing. Moses said it years ago, but I do think, in my opinion, the future of Counter-Strike isn't, can you invent a new map or necro all the old maps that got removed for a reason? It's, can you tweak the current maps to be more conducive to what people want from Counter-Strike? Like, just change some of the bomb site setups or change where the mid is aligned or something. Simple things like that could actually revolutionise the whole map in pro play.
Yeah, I didn't mean for this to turn into just the maps discussion, really. It was just more about Valve and just their lack of, I guess, ability to not only create things for Counter-Strike, but then also just be totally misaligned with the community that they do have that are still actively playing it. You know, I do still look a lot at what Valve have released into the game, and I just think they didn't make basically any of these things. This is all a workshop creator that's been poked and just gone, hey, we're going to put you in a case, or hey, we want you to develop bean people that we can put on our guns. I look at that and I just think, okay, well, it feels like they're doing what they can to maximize money out of it with as little effort as possible. And just seeing a little bit of tender loving care to some of the maps, to the practice idea that they even floated with Train, would have been nice to see, at least, to see that there was somebody actively in the Counter-Strike development team that was like, hey, I'm going to flesh this out entirely. I'm going to have every possible smoke lineup that I can extract from Not Out Here videos or Pro Play or whatever that is simple enough for an average person to understand. I'm going to make it easy for them to get into the map, and they just simply don't. So it's just, for me, it's poor. Even if I think there's a lot of other things that Valve are doing cool and that they're fine, I just wish they were a bit more aligned with the competitive community.
Also, this is where I'll break the fourth wall. Watch a master at work, because there's also a reason why that whole Aurora segment now will be a segue. Maui, what's your bad point, mate?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of the factors of Aurora right now. I would first touch on the fact that they lost Jota. That's my first negative regarding Aurora, because it seems like, I mean, these are rumors, so I'm not always entirely certain. I don't think the official statement covered this from Aurora. Well, I know it didn't, because I looked at Jota and Aurora's Twitter, but it seemed like Jota was benching himself on the team. And that, to me, speaks to him as a player who is probably idolizing playing for the best team from your nation, to actually go out and do that. I mean, that's like a youngster like Buzz playing for Astralis for a season or two and then benching himself. Like, how does that reflect on Astralis? But in this case, it really is what the reality is for Aurora. So I don't think that the addition of Soulfly is going to really net any positives for them. And it almost does feel like they're just getting the single lifeline right now, which is that Anubis is re-entering the map pool. By the way, which is a map they didn't pick in the series that they just played here at the Bounty. But I'll give them a little bit of leeway here, because it did just get integrated 5 days before their match, so they probably just weren't ready for it, and they thought that they could win if they just had gone with what they had already practiced. But I just don't think that, my bad point in general is just that I think the roster move here for Aurora is going to be a negative, that the calling style, I just don't think that Madger has ever come across reflective of or understanding of why we just never really rate them, because I think everybody that's from a non-Turkish speaking place at this point has called out similarly, the tactics for Aurora are probably the worst of any top 10 team. I think they're incredibly simplistic. They default for 30 seconds, then they group up as 5, and then they try to hit a bomb site together. It's why practically any team in the top 10 has a chance to beat them, especially with any time to prepare. It seems like in group stages, for whatever reason, they can get by, usually because they play lower opposition, and Waikady and Xantares are just engines of destruction. But as soon as they face off against an Astralis level team, like, a team that's even teetering on top 10, they can just, those type of teams can call circles around Aurora. I mean, Aurora were very close at that PGL Bucharest event of crashing out in the quarterfinals because an Astralis with their coach was clearly out game planning them on Nuke. So I think it just doesn't seem like, even when talking to Madger in a pregame interview with James Banks, did he recognize that, yeah, their tactics are bad. So I just think that this team has not really gone back to the drawing board. They haven't assessed their weaknesses, and that this change, which was forced upon them, is going to make Soulfly look way worse as a player than he actually is, because he practically had all the Xantares roles on his last team, and now he's going to have to play the Jota roles. And just as a light reminder here for Jota and what he provided to Aurora, I think some people may retroactively say, I mean, they'll look back and they'll just say, oh, what? Jota didn't even have a great rating. Of course he could get replaced. But Jota was in the conversation for Rookie of the Year for practically until Molodoi won an MVP award. Jota was seriously in the conversation. If you don't believe me, HLTV themselves posted a Rookie of the Year graphic in July of last year, and Jota's second on it. So he definitely had a serious case, and he was actually doing much better in those roles than you may have expected for a guy making a jump or having to play anchor positions, and on a team that still to this day does not seem like they know exactly how to put together a layered T side.
Yeah, I mean, Jota, when he first joined, I think there was concerns about how he would fit into the roles of being like a late round sort of player. And he actually flourished in a weird way, where that wasn't his particular skill set coming out of Sangal. He was definitely more of a pry bar, more headstrong, but he gained like a level of composure with Aurora that did seem good. Whether or not it's him benching himself, it's hard to say. Again, Aurora, another one of those teams that went to a lot of lands last year, but they also dropped out quite unfavorably, I guess, in quite a few of them, and so they did have time to rehash their playbook. But I think I did notice similar things where it felt like I wasn't seeing a cool new strategy that they'd pull out when the going got tough. It just felt like, okay, we were going to try another simple idea for an opener and try and work out a mid-round from there. I do have some hope for Soulfly. He's somebody that I had as a prospect a couple of years ago and never really got the call up to the Eternal Fire Turkish super team core. Because when he was on Sangal first, when a lot of them jump shipped over to Valorant, he actually did fulfill as like a young up and coming role player. He played anchor on big bomb sites. I think A Mirage is what I remember the most, and he was having to shoulder a lot of the responsibility of being like a star player, so to speak. And then now, like you said, in his last team, Fireflux, he was a bit more Xantares, a bit more aggressive. So he's played some of those roles on semi-successful teams before, and I think for me, I just want to see that return to grace. If he can be that anchor again and fulfill that Jota position, I actually think Soulfly can do it. I've always seen him as quite a talented sort of multi-tool type player. Maybe not necessarily exceptional in any one area, but just always liked his sort of temperance in I guess some of the moments for his previous teams. So I'm not as pessimistic, I guess, on the move, so to speak, unless we're primarily talking about Madger and the calling, because who's to say that improves?
I'll just say this. I don't like this move overall because if I look at Aurora, they were already a team that, in my opinion, didn't live up to their potential anyway. Like when I was actually putting something together last year, when I was doing a bunch of my research for the major, the thing that actually shocked me, I was really shocked, was I wrote down every time Aurora actually completed a win over like a top team. And it really wasn't very often. It was like 3 or 4 times for real in the whole year. What happened was they had a million close games against all the best teams, and they eye test wise looked like they should be like the 5th to 6th best team at times and looked really hot, but they actually very rarely ever won the game. Like they actually did fail in these key areas where it's like, to me, that implies your roster was good enough. In fact, maybe even had more potential in terms of placings than it got. But something about the structure didn't work. Something was flawed. There was a leak. Essentially, they were on a smaller scale. The problem with Falcons, like you look, here's what people don't get who are fanboys. This gives away, guys, that all you see is the crosshair. Because when you guys go, why do people like Pimp still keep going on about Falcons? Because when you look at the stars and the top end of Falcons, they should already have won tournaments. That's the joke. They have fantastic players. The problem obviously is, this is why they haven't won, they also suffer in some of these areas, like closing games out, not doing silly shit, fundamental mistakes, etc., even just having basic utility. Some of these areas where you look at the structure and the calling and stuff, that's where people have their questions, even though the joke is everyone only looks at the players. I'll do a similar comparison. I also feel like in this particular case, apparently now, as you guys have said, he's like benched himself or whatever, but even then, that's not that great a sign. I mean, I don't really know that you just do that purely on your own. Maybe that even implies you also, maybe you each knew the writing was on the wall and someone was going to get kicked eventually. Because when I tried to do that equation that I always do, which is a mixture of what's the rumour about who sort of has say in this team and what's the sort of name value, who do people care about? I'm sorry, a lot of teams, funnily enough, internally tend to kick people in quite a similar way as a fan would. They just look at the least popular name with the lowest stats and he gets kicked. So I made the point, I'll use the Falcons example again. I'll tell you an example of someone who could have felt hard done by last year, which is Magisk when he was on Falcons. Because if you remember, before they got Kiyosuke, Magisk was playing really well. But because for whatever reason they decided Tessa's got to stay, I always phrase it this way. So basically, because Nico played shit in a bunch of events, that means, and then bad at the mid, that means that like Magisk lost his job. Like, surely you should lose your job for what you did or what you need to add to the team. That's bizarre. So in my opinion, that's why I don't like this move. I don't feel like it solves any of the problems of what was causing Aurora to lose games. I wasn't actually watching games going, yeah, Jota not fragging enough. That's what cost them this game. I don't think I've ever even heard that as a take from anyone. Like, in fact, one of the things I hate about this move in general is I don't even think it's an upgrade. It could at best, in my opinion, be a side grid. And I'll add this in as well. I agree with what you just said there, but it also, the joke is, it doesn't just apply to Jota, it applies to Soulfly as well. None of these players are fitting the role they're doing in Aurora. They're just joining the team because it's the best Turkish team and they're the 4th or 5th best Turkish player, and then they just get the roles that are left over. We're on some like fucking early 2010 shit that they used to do in the other. So you know why I always used to say in NIP they had the most abusive 5th spot of all time? Because you would join as a star in another team and then get all the shit support roles. It was like, what am I doing here? And so people don't know the Jota move was a slam dunk when they did it, because if you wanted to add and make them more dangerous, that was like the next best Turkish player out there. He looked awesome, if people remember, in Sangal. Well, the joke is, I think another reason why this move hasn't been popular is if you were going to follow the same logic, everyone thought it was X-Floud that would get this. Even though, by the way, X-Floud, Jota and Soulfly would all have the same issue, which is you're all stars. You're all essentially the Zantares type star, or even that role in the other teams. Also, clearly, by the way, mimicking the best player from your country who's the star. And then you're all getting put in a totally different roles when you get recruited to this team, which is a bit bizarre. Because so again, I would say the same thing. So it's like, wait a minute. So because we can't, look, you can't possibly kick Zantares and Wikidia. They're just obvious pieces you keep. I think even Woxic's earned his keep at this point in time, and also what bloody Turkish opera are you going to get? And then so as a result, the question then becomes, are you allowed to kick Madja? This implies no, or it just won't happen, and for whatever reason. So that means there's just one spot left that has a fucking trapdoor under it endlessly. And whenever the team loses, by the way, same thing, that means basically Zantares having a couple of chokes and some big matches also probably meant the pressure was on a spot to be removed, even though that Zantares not always playing up to par. So in general, I'm not a fan of that. And I do look at this one, and I do think fans wanted it to be X-Floud and people who are analysts wanted it to be X-Floud. So instead, I'll tell you another negative. Eternal Fire was an absolute joke, by the way. I actually hope in one day someone will just say in an interview what their salaries were. It was fucking ridiculous. But I doubt Aurora's that much better, guys. I would imagine Aurora is actually min-maxing like a motherfucker. I would imagine they're more like a team that should be like 20th in the world. They just had a squad that has managed to, because of the Turkish angle, succeed and go way higher, with probably less salary. So I would just suspect that the reason why you take Soulfly rather than xCloud is you probably have to pay a decent buyout to Heroic. Remember, he's a Heroic player. Heroic sells players, mate, and they sell them for a decent amount. So I actually don't know that maybe you even had the choice in this regard. But I hate the recruitment because, like I say, this is like really old school thinking. Like, here's what people don't know. Really old school players, they were all like Richard Lewis. They don't think roles don't exist. They've said it a million times in interviews, guys. They think if you're good, you just learn and adapt to whatever that role is and you play it. But what I'll never understand about that is, right, the obvious thing I would say to someone like that is, so you think if I took Kay Serato, he could just play Mezzi's roles in Vitality and he'd be better, right, because he's a better fragger? Bro, a lot of old school players would say yes. I think that's absurd myself. Like, what you're doing isn't even about shooting people with a crosshair. But so sadly, I think that this actually also shows a pattern of recruitment in Aurora, that they do that old school thing that you used to do back in the day. When your team isn't doing quite as well as you think they should, you just look at the scene, pretend roles don't exist, and just go, who's the next best player available? Come and join the team. Whereas I think in the modern day, actually what a lot of us like about GMing in esports is the idea you look at what you need and you try and have that piece and you round out the structure and then you start playing the game and see if they can frag out and all that sort of thing. And also, I'll lastly highlight what you said and echo it, which is absolutely, people do not remember the early months of Jota in Eternal Fire, as it was called then. He was actually doing way better statistically, way better on the eye test. And actually, when Anubis was there, like I say, he was very good on that map, actually. It was one of the better maps. So even against top teams, he was one of the reasons they had upset potential. Yes, he maybe fell off a little bit later, but as I say, I think the whole structure suffered later in the year anyway.
It is funny, though, but they've been reaffirmed in that sort of, who's the better player? Let's just pick him up and he'll adapt to the roles. Because if you were looking at that Sangal before and said, hey, we need someone that's playing late rounds, a little bit more supportive, you would have picked xCloud, actually, instead of Jota.
Right.
But they picked Jota, and it ended up working. So they're just, I guess they're sticking with that philosophy.
Right.
And they're just like, well, let's pick up another talented guy that will fit exactly how we need him to.
Okay. Right, I have picked for my bad point. I think this is an easy one. I'm actually shocked more people aren't mad about this. You remember a whole year ago, I'll take you back in time. Let's go to the end of 2024. I'd spent the entire second season of 24 building up a narrative because in the old world, without VRS cores and without massive buyouts, this would have happened. You know, I told people in 2024, not 2025, 2024, I told people, well, you know what? It was cool watching these MOUZ runs, but forget about that, boys. It's over. They're going to get picked apart, you know. Exertion will be in FaZe, and then Tarji will be in Picatic GT or something, and then, you know, fucking YimFat will be in Falcons, and what happens is they'll get picked apart, and MOUZ will use this whole NXT pipeline. They'll bring the next people up, and MOUZ will be sort of like the ultimate elite farm team. They'll be the farm team for the absolute best teams to complete their squads. Not only did it not happen then, in fact, the only reason the whole Shuhei thing happens is, like I've implied, it's implied some sort of scandal behind the scenes, whether that's even just not liking him or having an argument or something. That seemed like their hand was forced on that one. And when do you get a player like Spinks available who can only join about 2 teams for whatever reason, right? So I think that one wasn't even one they chose to do. My bad is no MOUZ roster moves. No, after that second season, no MOUZ. Here's why it sucks. Now he has heard me make this point a million times. There's a team I always think of in the NBA in basketball, which is an example, unfortunately, how you don't GM and run a sports franchise. So basically, if you're running a sports team, you want to do one of 2 things. You either want to get really good players and win, or you want to spend as little as possible and just gamble that you're a fluky team, but you can make it every now and then, but you're min-maxing. You either want to essentially max out and spend all the money and have the chance to win, or you want to do the min-max and go, if I make the odd playoff, cool, but I'm not spending it. The worst position, I'll give you the example, is when I was watching basketball back in the early 2010s, late 2000s, there was a team, the Atlanta Hawks, who did, unfortunately, the opposite of that. They did, if you have the sweet spot, they had the worst spot, because what they would do is they had a squad that had some good players, but no one that was close to the best player in the NBA. Just a bunch of people who'd have been the 10th best player, the 11th best player, the 13th best player. See where I'm going with this? Then what would happen was they'd make the playoffs every single year, and in the playoffs, they wouldn't go out in the first round, they'd win the first series. In the second series, they'd come close to winning, or maybe every now and then they'd fluke and win it. And the problem was, though, they were never going to win the NBA, and they were never even usually going to be in the conference finals. And the worst problem about that is the core, because they'd done those things that felt like, oh, but we're only a step below, they'd keep the same core for years and years and years. And by the way, spoiler, this story doesn't end well. They never did anything. They just were sort of like a playoff team, but then who couldn't win, but weren't totally bad. So they were in my opinion, the worst spot you can be in. MOUZ is in that spot now. Like, the worst thing about MOUZ was, I'll tell you a stat a lot of people don't understand, and this is why all the rage in the HLTV Top 20 was about MOUZ players being added to the Top 20. Did you know that, yes, we all know Vitality made every semi except the first blast. You know MOUZ had more semi-finals than Spirit. I know, because Spirit won events, you're going to go, that can't be true. They have donk. No, MOUZ was a fucking lock for semi-finals this last year. But their one title was one of the most bullshit PGLs right at the beginning of the year, when no one cares, when you're playing against the Falcons with Dexter, and you're playing against FaZe with Elige, and like the best teams are like Eternal Fire, you know, like these were the best squads. But so unfortunately, when I look at the MOUZ team, boys, this isn't a project that hasn't had enough time. It's had plenty of time, especially with this core. Take out just the like Sphinx for bronze. This core has had so much time, and unfortunately, it has plateaued, in my opinion. People have seen their best level of play. They've tried everything. They've even, by the way, gone all over the map pool the whole time, which is one of my classic analysts tells it. You're sort of out of ideas. You tried everything. People don't know the reason MOUZ is mad that train got removed is at the end of the second season, they had to be train, overpass, and Inferno merchants. Those were their main maps. So essentially, what they were doing was punish picking Inferno and overpass as deciders, and pick into teams that don't like it, whichever one they didn't like. That already tells me, when you have a really well-rounded squad with good players at every position, you know you can't win. You know you're bumping your head against a glass ceiling constantly, but you're never getting through. And also, people will forget, because 2025 was a much more competitive year, you didn't even like in 2024, where you made way more finals and you won more of the events. Like, at least in that one, you could say, well, it was just the arena that cost. Remember, they used to win like the studio events, didn't they? So, and by the way, we don't have those anymore. They're all arena events. So to me, I think the idea you didn't make any roster move in MOUZ is just bad. I'm not even saying from the side, like in the past, of other teams could have benefited. Like, yeah, FaZe could use a MOUZ player. Some teams could do. I think for MOUZ, it's not good either. I think you had to mix it up somehow. You had to do something. Because even those moves, I didn't personally agree with the idea, like exertion IGLs and you kick Brawler. I don't really know if that's the fix. But I'll tell you what, it would have changed something. It would have given you a chance for like either drastic improvement or failure. Right now, it just feels like this is going to be the most boring playoff team in the entire world, because again, they should probably win their quarterfinal match. But like, you look at this MOUZ roster now, why should they ever win a semi-final? Why should they ever win a tournament? I find it hard to sort of get into the team anymore, unfortunately.
I think the disappointing thing about MOUZ as well is that when they got into they got into winning positions in some of the series, that they ended up losing.
Yes.
And it did seem like they started to develop almost like a choking problem, where, you know, we're not even talking about stage and arenas anymore, where it's like, oh, they get nervous. It's not that. They just seem to concede massive leads and lose those games. And I did think they needed a change just to get out of that mentality where, you know, because they stick with the same five, it's like, okay, we've been here before. Is it happening?
Oh, by the way, the one last thing as well, I'm also low-key shocked. If you think how their last game of the year went, that dog shit fucking arena game against MOUZ, mate, that gets someone fired normally. What are we doing? Like, what I always say to people, FaZe played awesome against Na'Vi. That game, you got the assist. Like, they just fucking told you, yeah, just beat the shit out of me, bro. I'm not going to do anything. They didn't even fight back in that game. It was crazy.
I think, though... Yeah, there are definitely some bits of MOUZ games where you think, how are these guys a top team, actually? Because they just seem to fall flat. I think there was an interview on HLTV Awards, actually, where they actually spoke, I think, to MOUZ, and they maybe had Apex on as well, where they were talking about, like, there were some teams that did want to make roster moves, but they couldn't almost, because the buyout seemed to either be too big, or they maybe missed a window where there was a chance to get them for a little bit cheaper, but they couldn't. And I think MOUZ were actually one of those teams from the clips that I've seen of them having that discussion, where MOUZ had talked about it, but almost couldn't come up with either a solution or find somebody that they could properly buy out. So it does leave them in this weird limbo spot where, yeah, they might just be one of these sort of unexciting playoff teams where the teams below them need to be able to punch up, and I think some of them have made good roster moves to actually do that. But whether MOUZ even maintain that position, knowing that what has been floated in the ether, that yes, there were roster moves discussed and they maybe want to change some pieces, but we're holding on to you guys for now. So just keep up the good work, I guess. Like, stay in the playoffs, I beg. Because that's all MOUZ that seem to be able to do, and maybe they get something mid-season, or maybe they finish it, they get something after this season. Who's to say? But yeah, just to see them in that holding pattern, I do fully expect to see more MOUZ chokes or more MOUZ semis where it's just uninspiring and honestly a little sad, because they actually do play very, very solid Counter-Strike when they're not in those big stakes
Absolutely.
games. When they play that opening quarterfinals game, they can. I genuinely think if they drew Vitality early enough, they would beat them, actually.
Yeah.
It's difficult to see MOUZ making the leap. I mean, the bad point about them is, I mean, not making a move. I feel like, yeah, we're in a weird position right now where, in some ways, I actually like that the buyouts are kind of high and prohibitively expensive, because then it means we have more continuity between rosters and orgs where they retain their players for a bit longer. I feel like that's something in esports in general where people move in and out of teams so fast that it's hard to build any sort of culture or identity. But now it's for the wrong reasons now that we have continuity, but it's for but unfortunately don't think it's really to MOUZ's benefit. I mean, Yimpatt, I would say, weirdly, even though he's so young, he did decline in performance from 2024 to 2025. I was kind of shocked personally that Exertion was really on the list for HLTV's top 20 in this one. They're all quite young though, and so that's kind of what I've been holding on to as someone that I'm not going to label myself a MOUZ believer, but I feel like I've been a little bit more optimistic than others have, because also they were working with a rookie IGL through 2025, and if he learned anything, I almost feel like in a lot of ways 2026 is going to come down to whether Brolin can live read a match state and come up with solutions better than he did last time, because it did feel like Cyclone, who received my Coach of the Year vote, was so important to that team, because when he called timeouts, I would see changes. I would see MOUZ find a fix. But round to round, if it's up to Brolin and these guys on the roster, I'm not really sure if I'm seeing good enough or strong enough switch ups that read what the opposing team was doing. So if Brolin can level up that side of his game, there might be something to work with here. But at the end of the day, man, I mean, I just can't really see any of these players going toe-to-toe with any of the truly elite teams. I mean, Furia, Vitality, and Falcons, I'm just going to pick all three of those teams for their personnel alone going into next year, or into this year, I mean. So that's the disappointing aspect here. And I'm going to be frank. I mean, I made a claim pretty early on that MOUZ was not going to do well with Brolin as the in-game leader, because he never exuded any sort of captain qualities at any point on any of his previous teams. So I would say I would be more willing to short MOUZ stock than buy it now with how things have turned out.
I mean, it's hard to say they didn't have a successful year, considering some of the other teams were far beneath them in terms of making playoffs and making deep runs. But yeah, they just needed to get their hands on trophies where there actually were these other super elite teams, because when they get to Cologne finals, they simply they beat Vitality, then they just can't do anything against Spirit, which is absurd to think about, really, in hindsight, that you get as far as that when Spirit weren't even really in a conversation to be as consistent as MOUZ were.
Well, it may be difficult.
I mean, the thing is that no, I mean, I think the whole MOUZ, I think MOUZ right now is just still a very hard team to get behind, because I think it was Chad at the Budapest Major had a line about it where people root for underdogs, they root for superstars, and they root for winners, and MOUZ is just none of the three. And I think MOUZ themselves have been pretty public about how they wonder, why does nobody root for us? I mean, like, legitimately in the quarterfinals, the roar for FaZe was decidedly louder than for Torzi, even in his home arena. You know, that's how bad things have gone for them. But just nobody truly thinks that they're gonna make it happen, and I feel like they don't necessarily have that belief either. So any sort of switch up in terms of players would have been a boon for me. MOUZ are just, oh man, it really, I mean, I think the analogy Thorin gave already about just playoff teams being just good enough to make the playoffs, but not really do significant damage is extremely apt.
The problem is, right, this is where to take Chad's like framing though. That's why they kept the project together too long. Bro, when this team all first got promoted, they were all underdogs. That was the best part of the story. That's why everyone was thrilled when they came from NXT and got into the main squad, and each of them earned their stay. If you remember, you had Torji come up and show he was legit. Then you had Exertion get added. Then Shuhei came as the final pick. You know, you had all this stuff. YouM3 got added. But the real problem is this. They've outstayed their welcome without winning the tournaments and becoming truly elite. That's the issue. As a squad, they did, but as players, they didn't. And so what's funny is, if anything, that's why they're also in the worst spot of all worlds, because they feel like they're the bullies at all the teams below them because they're the ultimate gatekeepers. But then when they come to what should be their P group of all the best teams you guys just named, they just get their ass handed to them, and then they just have to lose. And so the real reason people essentially, here's what Chad nailed there. You saw it with all this Furia discourse at the end of the year. Or people would much rather you were like semi-irrelevant, but then at the end of the year won 3 trophies or 4 trophies than just made every semi-final ever and didn't win a meaningful trophy. Like, they would rather the former than the latter, even though in theory the latter's actually better sports performance and overall, like, you know, like consistent, all the things we say we want in a team. The problem is that's not sexy, is it? And then lastly, there's another problem that you have if you're MOUZ. This is, in my opinion, the real reason why that was the most fugazi narrative at this last major, which went like this. Cos Torji, 1 out of the 5 players, is Hungarian, and the event's in Hungary. This is his home match, and all the crowd's going to cheer for him. I made this point to people. What, does everyone at IM Cologne cheer for fucking Big Clan? Everyone in Europe travels to these majors. It doesn't even work that way anymore. It would be like thinking every Taylor Swift fan comes from the city that the show is in. No, people travel around the world to go to those gigs. Like, people will go if they're from the other side of, like, the continent to go to that gig. So already, first of all, that was fake anyway. Like, spoiler, FaZe is popular with every crowd. So they were always going to be more popular than just Torji. Also, in that game, Torji was fucking terrible. That's another reason they couldn't cheer for him. And so lastly, here's the reason, in my opinion, also why people don't cheer for MOUZ. Because that dreaded term, the Zoomers, though, they have no aura whatsoever. And I'll tell you an obvious reason they have no aura. They can't have any. Because you know one thing MOUZ doesn't do, and they're the only team that's as good as them that I've ever seen can't do it. They can't talk shit to anyone in interviews because they do choke their tits off and lose all the big games. The problem is, mate, if you're like a really good boxer but you get knocked the fuck out every time, you can't really do some crazy shit talk to the other guy. You have to actually feel dangerous. You have to feel threatening. You have to feel like I've got an edge on it. You have to feel like if we go in the game, my shit talk won't negatively affect. But MOUZ doesn't even try to do that. They're all teddy bears, aren't they? Or they're all just fucking silent, like, just frag bro. Whereas in the modern day, like, the joke would be, mate, Eternal Fires and Aurora were a worse team than MOUZ, but at least they talk a bit of shit and they have a bit of personality and they have an identity, and, you know, people have a reason to cheer for them. So I know I agree with you. I actually do think also, it's not just like competitively they were a little bit still. No fans would be crying their eyes out if this roster got broken up or they brought some other people in. I don't feel there would have been any public backlash.
Yeah, just to un-Gen Z-ify the term, you know, they just don't have like a conduit of personalities, really. There's nobody that has anything that's even vaguely abrasive about them. Everyone's just a nice guy that plays Counter-Strike and does decently well, and it's... Yeah. You know, nobody sees themselves in that. Like, the average person at home is raging at their monitors and a little bit more aggressive, perhaps, if they're going to play in a competitive environment. Whereas MOUZ are just like, yeah, everybody. They played a fierce game. We didn't play our game, and we're gonna try and get better. It's like,
that's why I don't really, unlike other people. That's why I'm not that big. I don't really care that much about the fact that like Torji's sad after a game. It's like, mate, you're just like a streaky AWP who tries to do every shot as if you're Monacy. You miss most of them in the big game, and then you have a beard and you're friendly, and so I'm supposed to go, oh shit, no, it's so sad. Mate, you're supposed to be selling me carpets. What are you talking about? Like, you're supposed to be the really friendly guy that I get when I call up the insurance company who explains how I can adjust my rates and helps me out by talking to his boss. Like, you're not supposed to be, you're not some killer, homie. You ain't some demon who's supposed to smash me. You're never going to tell me I just fucking destroy them all. Except you could say that about your own chances in big arena playoff matches, but enough about that. Anyway.
Unfortunately, they do all give accountant energy. That's just the sad truth of it. I can't. Some of the guys on Falcons really, you know, they play up the celebrity of who they are, but yeah, MOUZ, they just need to get a little bit more. I mean, they just need to watch some like Kobe Bryant documentaries or something. It's just got to change the feeling of them.
Well, the problem is, if you are in MOUZ, it's not obvious and easy what you should or can do. But if you play at Prize Picks, really easy. I can tell you one of the best features of Prize Picks is, first of all, if you're American, it's legal in loads of the states, like 50 states or something. You go look up all the places it is. So it's totally fine to play here. And also, they've actually made it, they've sort of like gamified their system. It's really easy to do. All they do is they put out a bunch of projected stats. So, for example, in American football, they would say this quarterback, here's the number we're going to pick, like let's say one passing touchdown. All you do is pick more or less. It's really simple. There's nothing complicated about it. You just try and figure out. And in this case, by the way, it's also, as well as being fun to be right and try and win, you can also pick your favourite players. And if you know that player better than the random nerds out there, maybe you know that in this game, Steph Curry's going to hit more than 3-3-pointers or something. Maybe this is a team he always does well against, or you look at his form and he's coming into a bit of a, if you're watching American football, maybe Matthew Stafford, you already knew he was cracked. And with this squad he had this season, he would throw the touchdowns and the yards, etc. Well, with Prize Picks, it's really easy to do. They also have loads of additional features, by the way. Like now they have something called early payouts. So if your player gets off to a hot start, you have the option to actually cash out the winnings before the game is even concluded. They have a community feature now also, if you want to play with like-minded people or friends, etc. They have a bunch of social feeds features where you can share your Prize Picks with your friends. You can actually copy lineups from people who win just by clicking. You like mirror what they picked, basically. And also, you can obviously use those as the inspiration of how to make your own picks when you do it. And you can follow Prize Picks partners like me. If I was to share my account, you could follow me and see what I'm picking, etc. So you can tail, or indeed, if you're like all those people on Twitter who I don't believe, you could fade all of my picks, couldn't you? And say, well, if Thorin thinks that, I'm going the other way. And it always works, even though I noticed that person still remains a Billy Nobody bomb who doesn't appear to ever win in that scenario. I mean, it's almost like you can just lie and talk is cheap online, said the guy who made millions talking online. Whatever, all good, don't worry about me. Anyway, the point is, much like my world, the good thing about Prize Picks is it's good to be right, and when you're right you get paid. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code SNAKE, it's on the screen, simple to remember, to get $50 in lineups after you play just your first $5 lineup. That's code SNAKE to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Right, now we move to the ugly section. So Yumi, what is ugly right now?
Yeah, I'd like to just preface this with, I enjoyed the HLTV Awards, and I love it every time I go.
Anytime there's a disclaimer, I'm already in. So let's go. What's he setting up for here?
Every time I go, I get to meet new people. I get to have a good time with people that are in Counter-Strike. It's nice to see everybody in person as well, because sometimes I'm just always online, so it's nice to have actual interactions with Counter-Strike people. But this HLTV Awards, with the expansion of the amount of people, also brought in a lot of people that just weren't Counter-Strike people, which is, to me, not what the awards is supposed to be about. You know, I don't go to a League of Legends award show. I don't expect to be invited to that type of...
By the way, I know this is obviously the scary part, but could you give an example? What mentally are we thinking of? What placing are we... What type of person are you referring to?
There are some people that are just streamers that are mainly mainly Valorant focused, and they're journalists that are from other esports that have nothing to do with Counter-Strike.
I just wasn't aware of that. I thought you just meant like loosely community-based people who don't, do more of the sort of like casual CS. No. There was actually people from other esports there as well. I wasn't even aware of that.
They're just people a bit more industry-wide, and I think part of that is because HLTV were running, a business conference thing.
Oh, I see.
People give talks for. And they're going to invite them to the awards as well as a result of that, which, I don't necessarily... I can't knock the business model. I appreciate that they do something like that, but it did feel like there were a few more people that were just like far less endemic to the community, and it didn't feel like the same, I guess, circular celebration of Counter-Strike like it has been in previous years. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, that's why I've put it in ugly as well, because I still got to meet some of those people, and they're lovely people that seem to be interested in sort of branching out a little bit, but yeah, it just felt like the circle kept expanding to the point where it's not just the extra content creators and streamers that play Counter-Strike on the occasion. It did feel like there was just people that were there as an opportunity and maybe got invited by HLTV for certain reasons that were not even really to do with the necessarily Counter-Strike. So it's just a little bit of a weird one for me. I maybe wasn't expecting it. It didn't really affect the totality of the awards. I just thought it was a bit odd that existed, because again, you don't see that same crossover to maybe other esports don't have award shows per se, but it felt like a bit more of an industry awards that happened to have a CS focus.
I mean, I was noting that. I feel like I follow a few, funny guys on Twitter, and there's just a lot of stuff that pops up on my For You tab. When I started seeing that just 500 follower skin trader Andys are at the award show, I really wondered, is this actually an exclusive group of people that are attending these, or is this just anybody with a pulse that can walk in? Because I feel like it's actually, I'll even just say this, and this is almost just, it's not even really a subtweet. This is almost just a message to Prof, who puts on the award show. I think it's actually entirely in your best interest to close off the invites by probably 30%, because from what I have heard from people that were there, I think a lot of the players were extremely unhappy that it became more of a fan meet and greet.
Nice.
Because a lot of people just started approaching people like Monacy, people like, Nico, people like, I just say that the people that are, the big superstars, like the people on Vitality too, they all just get approached and ask for a dozen photographs, and it's like, it's not really how an award show is supposed to work.
Weren't cordoned off in, like, the players weren't in one area, or the people could
why would they be? It's just everybody's regarded as the same if you're invited to the award show.
Oh, fair enough.
It's not really like there's paparazzi at these things. It's just people that are supposed to be in the industry, and then if it's, I mean, I think like the way I guess you could change it, but I don't know. This seems pretty harsh. Is that, for like the Oscars or the Golden Globes or whatever, it's like it's like after parties are sometimes like house parties. They're just like, George Clooney is going to invite 24 people over and they can get +1s, and they kind of know what the code is of these things.
Yes.
But when the whole of the awards show, which is like 1,000 people, are then also invited to the singular after party, then what do we do? Wow. That's just too crazy, right? But before, I think it was fine, because when it's 500 people, that's totally reasonable, because everybody there has been vetted. Everybody there is either like, working on the broadcast, somebody that's extremely closely adjacent to it. But when you're starting to invite, I think sometimes less is more. That's it. I also think that in award shows like this, quantity is nice, but after a while, it becomes, it's depreciating. It's just that it doesn't scale infinitely, that always you're going to want more. You just, after a while, 500 people is probably the most in Counter-Strike that you could really, like, if you really struggled, you're going to go down the line of like, okay, I want maybe the 5 people from every top 20 team. Then I want all of the people, anybody who's had any sort of feature on like a tier 1 to tier 2 broadcast. And that includes production staff too. But once we start inviting people who are the moderator of a Flom stream, what the fuck are we even doing? It's just like that. The dude's no hate to my own chat moderators, but like, I don't necessarily think you guys should really be getting the for what is supposed to be an industry exclusive award show. Yeah.
You have to understand, Maui wants it to be like that movie Elysium, where he lives on the like orbiting spaceship, and you don't even have a way to access, where you're just some peon on the ground doing all the manual labor. That's what his own mods are like to him, which I appreciate. I also like to run sort of ancient civilization model of how I treat the people underneath me, where I'm the fair god emperor, and then they are just peon serfs who are there to prop me up and elevate me. No, I know what you mean. I'll even give an example. It's not even a diss, it's just an example of like, what? That guy's there. When I saw all those tweets that were like, the Polyp guy who's just Magic's mate and does memes is there, like, does the invite just say everyone except Thorin in the world is invited? Like, what is this shit? Like, that is a bit bizarre to me, because I know what you mean. This is supposed to feel like the Oscars for Counter-Strike, which means it's supposed to have a level of prestige. You can't just be a complete nobody and get on that red carpet or go to the after party, like you say. And if people don't know, by the way, that is one of my number one fucking triggers when I used to work events. Was back in the day, I remember it was ESL used to do this. They would, during like an ESL Cologne type event, run run a raffle for fans to win tickets to the after party. And I used to say to them, you have fucked the whole after party by doing that. Because if that fan is the dickhead who takes out his phone and films or takes photos of people who are drunk or high or fucking cheating on their girlfriend, you have actually ruined the entire fun, let your hair down vibe of the after party. Because actually one thing I don't think people appreciate is I get 1 million times over, I did a Substack on this about the Esports Awards, but I was also applying to HLTV Awards. When I say stuff like, I don't think this player should be here on the HLTV top 20, people go, Thorin, all you have to do is make your own, mate, then you can battle them. It's like, you know, the HLTV Awards isn't just about the top 20. That's what the website is, mate. That's what the articles are about. The awards show is about having a big gala that people get to attend and dress up in a suit and get photos taken. And remember, unlike every tournament, there's no matches there, so no one has the stress of competing, and they even get to have a powwow with their top players. And actually, an essential part as well of the prestige of attending and doing all is the notion in esports that the after party is where there are no cameras and you let down your hair. And yes, then Monacy could be partying with some guy from a lesser team and it turns out they're actually mates and they can just have a chat. So that doesn't work if at any one moment, if I don't know a guy, is that a fucking fan literally overhearing what I'm saying to a team I might be about to join, or me talking shit about it? Like, it sort of takes away the fun vibe of that. And I do think a lot of people want the HLTV Awards to be almost like a celebration of the top end of CS and everyone having a fun party at the beginning of the next year, etc., as well as celebrating everyone's success, etc. So I do think that's a bit well. Go on.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are obviously cameras and photographers that are walking around. There are HLTV employed so that they take photos and they upload them online. But there is a scrutiny and there's they filter things. You know, if they feel like they've taken a bad photo or something that's going to put someone in a weird position, then it's, I don't imagine that ever makes the cut. So yes. I think it's very very industry field. I still feel like happy that I can go to these events and the sort. It just felt a little, the vibe, the atmosphere was a little bit different this time around compared to some of the previous ones. And I imagine that's just all the extra people that were tangentially involved within esports that may not have been Counter-Strike. So
what I always think of when I say that thing about the after party is, I won't say who the person is, but there was a member of talent many years ago when I worked at events where we were just in some bar somewhere. This actually wasn't even an after party, but I'll give you the example. We were just in some bar somewhere, like, it was either like day one of the event or the day before or something. And it was one of those ones where, we all have like a late call time. So everyone's had like quite a few drinks, or maybe they've smoked some of the devil's lettuce, etc. And some random fan saw us and said like, oh, hey, guys, can I get a picture with you now? And this talent member actually said, no, I'm sorry, like, we're like at this moment, like, we don't want to take photos, I'm afraid. And even though a fan might then go and put that on Reddit and be like, no, what he meant was, when I've had like 7 drinks, mate, I don't want someone to take a picture of me and put it on the internet and have all my eyes all fucked up and people going, what's going on? I don't want to be judged in that moment. Like, that's not the moment where I'm presenting myself to the world as my job. I'm actually out in my downtime now, letting my hair down. Like, I actually have to be allowed to be a person off camera and not be held accountable. So that's what I always think of in this example. I do think if you're a TO, people want the after, put it this way, there's a way you can do this, but it's my joke earlier, but serious, the Elysium model. There was an event way back in the day, the first DreamHack Malmo Masters one, the one that was run by NIP, if you remember, when they had Pitt and they shockingly won it. And I can tell you, they're the only ones that nailed this after party model. What they did was, fans could attend the after party, but there was 2 rooms. One was a VIP room that you could stay in if you're a pro, and if you wanted to come out and meet fans, you could come out into this general nightclub area and you could meet them all and do all the rest. But if you wanted to stay and have this private vibe, it was behind closed doors, no one could look in, and nobody could sneak in either. You either have to do it like that or you have to not invite fans, in my opinion. Because I agree, in this scenario, you've expanded. If the concept of it is it's a gala for your CS industry, then why are we doing extra beyond that? Especially because, like, one thing I think's naive is it's never going to be an event where you have like 3,000 people in the crowd, they're all paying for tickets, mate. So it's not like you're going that way anywhere. So I would just say tweak it a bit, because the people you actually make the event for surely is all the players and the industry people. Like I say, it's like a gala for people to celebrate CS, isn't it? Your ugly point, Maui? Yeah.
Okay. I guess we're just taking the ugly point to be about HLTV stuff. So my ugly point is the I guess we'll just finally talk about it because we haven't had a podcast since the list really is. There's a lot of things I could have picked on for their top 20 list, but I'll just go right to the heart of it. I feel like HLTV's placement of donk at number 2 and ZywOo at number 1 it's actually a disservice to what an individual award should be about, and that there's a bit of a I guess as people are looking at this list unfold, I think there's a lot of reverse engineering in the justification for putting ZywOo at number 1. And I feel like despite the efforts of a lot of pundits such as myself, Thorin, I'd say Launders with his own list, there's a clear HLTV hegemony in controlling many of the overarching narratives in this space, which is why this is actually extremely important, because you go down the line a few years and people are going to think that Kenny S was not a top 5 player in his best year ever, that he was overrated, because they just look at these kinds of numbers or these kinds of awards and they take it as gospel. And that's kind of how the common fan operates in this space. In fact, I feel like the arguments, I mean, it mostly, as we watch Striker on damage control for his own positioning of ZywOo at number 1, you're just kind of seeing fans try to paraphrase and parrot exactly what he says as if that was their original argument, which is just so entirely in bad faith. Because if you actually look at many of the arguments for ZywOo at number 1 prior to the award being bestowed, it's almost like the argument, it's like people are just kind of going in loops a lot of the time and just saying more awards equal better. And I'm going to say that this was probably a pretty tricky year for these guys, because it's finally a year where where I think Pimp actually brought it up before, where in a way the MVP is a team award. And that's not something I really wrap my head around too much until this year, where having to think about, like ZywOo, if you put up the exact same numbers on Donk's team and Donk put the exact same numbers up on ZywOo's team, or just had those kinds of performances, there would be no real conversation here. If Donk had all of those MVPs as the exact same player and ZywOo didn't have them, well, then I don't think anybody's even fighting for ZywOo at this point. And I'm going to bring in one take that Launders and I had a back and forth discussion over here in Malta at the Blast event regarding our positioning of Donk at number 1. And this was a really, really great take from him, is that he said that it's for HLTV, it's extremely difficult to go against the fact that ZywOo is the 2-time major winner, major MVP winner, but he almost relates that to when Kirby won the MVP over Device, and then it actually in a way strengthened Simple's 2018 win, because he was able to because he didn't have 2 major MVPs in that year. And that the margins were so slim between Rops and ZywOo winning the MVP that if they actually gave it to Rops, which for my money, I feel like most of their metrics would have said they should have given it to Rops. Like, he had a better grand final rating. The overall playoff rating was identical between the two. That the rating overall was just a smidgen.
Put it this way, I'll use the same thing you just said, Maui. Here's a food for thought. If the two players, ZywOo and Rops, had reversed stats, so they both had very close rating, but ZywOo had carried the semis in the final, including the last map, you think ZywOo wouldn't have won the MVP? I think it's the same principle. I actually think ZywOo was getting special treatment, Maui.
Yeah, I think.
Because I also thought Rops was the MVP of the major. I'm not even hating by saying that.
No, yeah, and I feel like in general, I just think that in what is supposed to be an individual award, obviously there has to be some level of criteria. Like, I can't just take a guy on the ranked 25th team who had a 1.4 rating because he's playing against tier 2 players. No, obviously. But once you, in my eyes, pass a threshold of playing against elite opposition regularly enough, we can fairly judge your play. And I don't think that the difference in 30 maps or whatever is even all that relevant when the sample size for Donk is already so high. I mean, I feel like then you're starting to create further criteria just to justify a position that you were already going to make based off of MVP awards because you want to put so much value into your own MVP criteria. Either way, I just think that there's been I'll have more to say, but later as we get through this topic. But I just think that this whole giving of ZywOo number 1 has kind of rewritten the history books, and it's something that I think in 2 or 3 years people are going to look back on and say that HLTV made a mistake here. I know that that's going to be a pretty contentious take for people today, but I don't think people are really going to sit well with this decision.
Well, I mean, if you look even at some of the years that ZywOo won #1 over Simple, I think there is some argument to be made, and there were certainly some pundits. I know, Thorin, you're one of them as well, that, thought Simple got robbed in one of those years. And I think, even then, that felt closer in terms of actual, like, skill to output versus team play. I think those decisions felt more subjective than this. If you're HLTV and donk has won 4 events, got MVP at all the 4 events, and then in your notable stats table, nearly every metric they put down, he is #1 in. I don't think that it's fair to then give him #2 in any position. I think if you asked any professional player in the circuit, they would say that donk is the best player. Whether or not he's the HLTV #1, that's where they would disconnect. But we've seen, HLTV do look at the top 20 as just simply, oh, well, anybody that's competing in top tier events could be in the top 20. I think in donk's rookie year with Spirit, before the Katowice, he could have easily justified being at the very, very border of top 20 just because of how outrageous he was, even against the lower level teams. Like, you see players like Simple currently going to look against lower level teams. He's farming, but he wasn't farming like donk was. Not in the same vein, not in the play style that he innovated. I do think this is the more outrageous of the decisions that HLTV have made in their rankings, just simply because, like, donk has some mileage ahead of ZywOo, even statistically, if you compare their ratings over that large sample size. And then he's just the #1 in, like, every leaderboard that seemed to matter in like positions or openings or headshot, like everything just seemed to be donk's. And I think, and if you ask anybody who they would take right now to fulfill any role on any team, they pick donk. ZywOo is a multi-tool player that is on the best team and does play to a very, very high standard. We're always going to hold him there. But donk is an anomaly. Like, the past couple of years, he has genuinely been absurd in terms of his individual output in the absence, actually, of the better structured team. And I think that should bear some importance, because I do agree. People look back retroactively at these rankings and they go, oh, well, that guy was only a top #10 on the list, or he was only #5 on the list, and therefore he wasn't that important. The average fan isn't expected to keep up with absolutely everything or use these metrics necessarily to dictate their decision making. So they use and hope that HLTV can be objective in their decisions as to how they rank things. I regardless of whether they put donk #1 or not, HLTV were always going to get backlash, regardless of what happened, because it'd be like, oh, but the achievements of ZywOo, there would have been conversation, there would be discourse. But I think most people I've spoken to directly, even at the awards, agreed that donk probably should have gotten #1 just because of the year he's had.
Put it this way, outside of HLTV and ZywOo fans and Vitality themselves, I actually think the craziest thing about this is, you've seen, as Maui pointed out, quite a few public figures say this, but also I get the vibe every player actually thinks donk's better than ZywOo too. Like, there's actually a very bizarre consensus that actually donk is the best player, maybe the best player ever, and this was the best year ever. It's just that when we come to how the awards criteria works, ZywOo gets to win it. Now, I will say, I won't tease what it is, but I don't know when this will be released, but there's actually some forthcoming content that I'm a part of where, let's just say, the whole, like, HLTV top 20 topic is discussed. But I have very different points to what I'm about to make now, because on that one, I almost played like a devil's advocate thing for the historical concept of how you do awards and how HLTV's traditionally done their awards, and I explain a lot. So anyway, you'll see that separately, but this might sound weird, but it's all cordial what I'm about to say. This is more my take and how I would do it. So there's 2 real points you guys are making here. One is specifically, was donk better than ZywOo? There's that conversation. And then the other one is, how does HLTV do their awards? And crucially, how do they justify them? So one of the problems I have here is this, right? Nearly all the discussion about this topic was 2 things. It was 1, what is the HLTV rating and the stats? So what do stats say? And then 2, tangentially, but not 100% connected to that was, do you have EVPs and MVPs? Those are the main things that they were considering. Now, what is so bizarre to me is already what we've done there is because you're only considering the raw stat with no context around it, or how deep in a tournament, and then among the players deep in a tournament, how highly you were ranked. What we're already doing there is we're saying, oh yeah, this is an individual award. We're not going to consider what team you play for and what the teammates do, etc. But then at the same time, you're going to say you're doing all that. But as pointed out by Maui, effectively, to get the EVP and for your stats to mean something, as you're saying, it doesn't matter how good you are if you're the 21st team. The joke is you could be donk and do every single keystroke the same, but if you'd have played in pain gaming, you could never be number one, no matter how well you played. But so the problem here is it is a team award. And that's one of my big problems with how they're doing it, because since it's a team award, I don't know what the point of the list is. And I'm being serious when I say that. Like, as in, this is where, this might sound weird, but if the award, because to me, the mistake they made from day one is they put the word top. That fucked them. Because I'm sorry, in my opinion, top means best. If you said, what's the top car, that doesn't mean what car do I like. It means what's the best car. If they'd have just said, if the award wasn't even a top 20 boys, it was just a player of the year. Player of the year is very nebulous. You can win that for being a cool impact player. Like, the joke would be, I'm not trolling, if Mongols had won the fucking Blast Austin Major, in other sports, you could say Senzu's the player of the year. Look at what he did. Wow. His storyline dominated. Wow. You could do things like that. Or you could say Rops is the player of the year, by the way, if you're not going off pure the best, just a player that we want to highlight and celebrate for that year. Him joining Vitality is why they won. He completed the squad. He maybe even helped Ziwu play. Anyway, so the point is, what I always hate about this is I've thought about this topic a lot from traditional sports. Spoiler, one of the reasons why I have a very obvious bias is I'm a massive fan of incredibly good individual carries like Kobe Bryant in basketball, or like Aaron Rodgers in the NFL. And so one of the things I've always appreciated actually traditionally about sports was the idea that you don't over-focus on team success, because I always explain it this way. We already celebrate the best teams. They get the prize money and the trophies. Meanwhile, if you're an individual player who is godlike but you don't win, that's what the individual award is for. And so in history, when you look back, you would know from all the MVPs and trophies, Ziwu was the player who had a fantastic year, the best year of his career. But if you watch the play, you'd go, oh, I'm glad they celebrated Donk, though, because his team wasn't as good, but he was supernaturally, insanely good. I think that's a problem when you essentially say, because Ziwu's team won all these tournaments, therefore he went higher in the tournament and played, and then got more EVPs and everything. That means he has to automatically win, because some of that isn't like something Donk has any control over with his mouse. He can't do. In fact, haven't we all that? Isn't the real reason the donk one is the biggest problem? You can't imagine him playing better. So at this point, you're just saying if you're HLTV, sorry, donk, it's not in your power. No matter, even if you're the best player ever, if Ziwu's team has more success, you can't win this award. Like that implies it is a team award.
And the thing is, like, they already celebrate roles, especially, and Vitality won every role, bar the one.
Well, this is the point I'm going to make. So another reason why I have a problem here is the reason I made that point earlier about they clearly, by their own explanation, don't consider team factors. So they're acting like it's an individual award, but then they act like a stat is only from what you did individually. They really do act like if you put Donk in Pain Gaming, you could get every single frag the same. By the way, Donk himself, I don't think would get absolutely the same kill in Pain Gaming. It's not as good a team. He wouldn't have She-Roll there. He wouldn't have fucking Tanae. He wouldn't have people Harley around him. So some of these things do help. So similarly, what obviously made this look silly was HLTV themselves. Remember that thing they printed out at the end of like the team of the year? The team of the year was everyone except Flames, and Donk was in Flames' spot. So what you're saying is Ziwu got almost the same numbers as Donk while having Coach of the Year, IGL of the Year, Closer of the Year, Anchor of the Year. What Opera of the Year? What are we doing? What are we doing? Well, he is the Opera of the Year, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah, what are we doing at this point in time? Like, again, this is actually what's part of what spurred this conversation is at the time of recording. Yesterday, Striker made a bunch of justifications on Twitter where he not only, when people confronted him with that, like Launders said to him, like, yeah, but when you're on a team like Vitality, you have better teammates, better comms, better positioning. He then said a statement that I just think it's not only I believe it is wrong, I think it is mental. He essentially suggested that somehow rating 3.0 can somehow actually accommodate those factors. matters, like intangibles your team. By the way, comms don't even feature in the game, Striker. How would Reaching 3.0 figure out that your team comms better than like Falcons speaking second language English? You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing? Similarly, how can the game with a round swing, how does round swing help me in my team when I'm ZywOo get a kill because I never had to worry about if a guy was flanking me because Mezzi was watching that flank? It can't. That doesn't show up on a scoreboard. There's no stat for that. And one of my problems here is what you're doing is you're saying stats are what you're considering. You're not considering team setup and structure. Well, here's the main problem you have. First of all, I think the number one thing in history that you'll be able to say about this year when someone says ZywOo was the best player is you'll just say, yeah, but Donk had a super flawed squad, which even themselves had to rotate players and has rotated players again afterwards. ZywOo had what people will say is the best team to ever play Counter-Strike, or at least late CSGO and CS2. In fact, they're so insane, they're only being compared to Astralis, the greatest team of all time, and most people are saying the role structure of all his teammates is almost perfect. Essentially, only Flames isn't the best because the joke is Donk plays that role. Like, aside from that, everyone is fantastic. So I do think that's a problem. By the way, I even think the problem applies to more than just ZywOo. It applies to his teammates. Because just like Maui just said there, again, remember what I said about individual awards? I want it to be that in history, if I look back, okay, this guy wasn't on the best team, but he was the MVP. He must have been better than this other guy who maybe won the championship, right? HLTV, just like Maui said about Kenny the S, because if you don't know, Kenny S, unfortunately, would usually have like a season where he was insane, but it was never all within 1 year, so he never got to be number one. He was never close, actually, by the way. So, for example, famously, 2015, the year at the beginning, he was totally gorted. He ended up 6th that year. So that means in history, when someone looks back, remember, Olofmeister from Fnatic is number one. They're supposed to look back and think not only Olofmeister, but Flusher from Fnatic was better too than Kenny S. By the way, back then, the rating wouldn't even support that. Kenny S had a way better rating. He won a major game top 2 at 2 of them. So back, also, by the way, the criteria's changed a little bit too. I noticed for ZywOo specifically, that I'll get to in a second. So I do think it's whack that someone would look back and go, well, I guess Flusher was just better than Kenny S. Lol. Like, no, not at all. But that's what the list would tell you. So similarly, does anyone actually really believe Mezzi, who I think was like, what was Mezzi, 11th, 8th or something? Somewhere around that, right? Isn't that
I think 12.
12, there you go.
The lowest vitality rate.
Does anyone really believe Mezzi was better than the players below him who were like the bona fide star of their team? No, he wasn't, but because he required all of his teammates doing the things they did and ZywOo to have a chance to be 11th or 12th or whatever in this case. So already it's... I don't think you're solving for what you think you're solving for if you're HLTV, because essentially I think Striker is justifying at the end. This isn't some sort of like a vibes-based, placing-based, how do we stack up the teams that were successful? He's trying to then double down the idea this is the best players and that this did prove that ZywOo was better. So that's one problem I already have. And then the reason why I bring up the stats thing is they're doing a mistake at HLTV that does tilt me, which is they're acting like these are hard stats. The rating by definition isn't a hard stat. It is a formula that you tweaked and you decided. Remember, God didn't give you the rating. So you go, oh, well, actually, the rating tells me that this person's better. You decided the rating. You decided what's important in the rating. It's why, if people don't know, the reason why Donk's stats are bonkers and no entry aggressive rifle could be like that in CSGO is the old HLTV rating was more for like mid-round AWPers. This one does actually emphasize being aggressive early and getting all the AK kills. So it just does. Like, it allows you to get bigger numbers. Well, here's my problem. We already don't use hard stats in any game for awards anyway. Like Maui, they don't give the fucking NBA MVP automatically to whoever has the most points per game. They don't give the Ballon d'Or in football to whoever has the most goals. That might be, that might be something that'll make you think about that guy, but you don't just go, he got 52 goals, the other guy got 49, I guess he wins. Because we all know not all goals are equal, and having more goals depends on things like what's your midfielder like, what's your team setup, how well is your squad GM'd, etc. So that's even with hard stats. HLTV rating is an abstraction and a formula. So in my opinion, when you yourself set the parameters of HLTV rating, but then you turn around and use it to tell me who is better in reality, all you've done there is say, this is the length of a ruler, put it next to something. It's like, but you decided the length of the ruler though. Like, you know what I mean? You created the measurement device. It wasn't some objective thing that existed outside of you. And then the last thing to say is this. The main reason why they gave it to ZywOo essentially is because this is where, if you watch me on the other show, you'll see why it seems like I'm devil advocate position. Look, HLTV had no choice as to give number one to this year. Not only the precedent of past years. Like, if people don't know, I think the worst example ever of this is Astralis in 2018. Are you ready? Astralis in 2018 not only had all 5 players in the top 20, all 5 were in the top 13. That means they told you Glaive and Zipniks were better than like the stars of almost every other team except maybe the top 5 or something, right? I'm sorry, that something is very flawed if we're talking about the best players. Because that's not best players, that's best performing players relative to placing and whether you get a certain cut-off. So already, to me, that's already a flawed approach. And so, yeah, that's the issue I have. Essentially, the way HLTV does it is that's why when they run the EVPs, it's relevant, guys. Because EVPs and MVPs at the end of the year, that's what they're really looking at. They're comparing that set of stats. That's why, if you notice, they thought the kill shot on social media, you might have seen this, guys, was to say among the EVPs and the MVPs, you know, Zebu was ahead in 12 out of 16 events. You know, there's some stat like that, which to anyone who was just going off who's the best player, it's like, who gives a fuck? What's that got to do with it again? What's a Chopper having a shit game means now Donk was worse in that tournament? Like that's almost what you're implying if you're striker in HLTV. So unfortunately, I do also agree. And the reason why, even though in past years I've definitely wilded like everyone and gone mad over ratings, the only reason I've gone particularly, notice the only one I went mad about this year was number 1. And that's just because even though I totally understand HLTV's rationale and they are somewhat locked into it, like they've already decided that criteria and you can't, I'm sorry, just change it at the end of the year to make someone else win. That would also be corrupt as fuck. But I'll tell you the reason why I went a little bit mad about this one. Because as I said on Twitter, where Striker also tried to, or maybe it's Prof, tried to prop it up by going, you know, as a number 2, he had a better year than most people who've ever placed number 2. And I went, no, as number 2, he was better than anyone who ever placed number 1. That's why it's jarring. Because I think, put it this way, let's just, this is obviously just an analogy. If Donk died tomorrow, I'm sorry, that was the best year of Counter-Strike ever so far. And he came number 2. So again, what are we doing? What are we doing at the end? By the way, that's why I'd say just rename the list. Because my problem with it is, if I know all you're doing is sorting the top 5 teams based on placings and then who among them gets to be where, but it's all gate kept by your team, then that's fine. You can do that. That's a type of a list. In fact, actually, when you do greatest lists, that's what they all are. They're all championships. You have to have accomplishments, etc. Like Blame F could never be on a GOAT list, could he? Wouldn't matter how good he is.
If the whole list was called just the greatest players of 2025.
That's a great angle.
Or even if they just want to call it the most valuable players of 2025, it would be better. But top implies individual award.
I think so, at least.
It just it doesn't, and it doesn't come across as that. I feel like it's man, I just feel like the history of the game gets so warped when these things go wrong, because even though other people like ourselves try to make our lists, we try to, make these cases and everything like that. At the end of the day, on the graphic, on a broadcast in 8 years from now that I'm not working, there's no one to even provide context. So that's where it kind of is a shame that it's just, and I think that's probably why some people were wondering, like, why I get so worried about HLTV's list. It does, at the end of the day, it kind of does write the history books.
Yeah, it's chaptering, essentially, is what the top 20 is supposed to do, is chaptering each year.
Also, I've got one more point for you. The one area they have, it's inarguable, changed the criteria, is because you notice a lot of Vitality and Zewu fans himself made this point. The reason why Zewu had to be number 1 is because he was the 2-time major MVP, right? As Maui's just pointed out, tiny bit slimy when you won probably the closest MVP race ever, and actually a lot of people think the other guy should have been the MVP. So already you've sort of put your finger on the scale there, because you've made it sound like clear-cut MVP. No, by literally 0.01 HLTV rating. And I think, as I just said, I think just because he's Zewu. Reverse that. Have Rops be the one who carries the group stage and doesn't do very well in the final and the semis, and have Zewu be the one who carries the semis and the final is 0.01 rating below. Do you really believe Zewu wouldn't have the MVP? Of course he fucking would. You've seen enough tournaments to know I'm absolutely correct about that. But I'll go one step further. What the fuck are you talking about majors counting in Player of the Year awards? Let me tell you a story about a man called Zewu. You know, in 2019, are you ready for a mega stat? I believe in 2019, Zewu and Simple had the same HLTV rating at the end of the year. Even though half the year, Simple used the Krieg, if you remember, they got Guardian back into the team. Right, in 2019, Na'Vi made the semis of that major. They lost that famous round to Enzo Mirage, remember, and didn't make the final. That was the first major. At that major, Zebu's first major, rookie player, he came 9th to 11th. Then, when you went to the next major, Starladder Berlin, Na'Vi lost to NRG in the round of 8 when Simple did that stupid thing where he changed MOUZ. That was the one where Zebu made his first playoffs and got beaten by fucking a Vanguard with Shitter Adren and Quicker and all those guys, and Buster, etc. He got to be number 1 player of the year that year. By that logic, Simple's the player of the year. There you go. Right, retroactive. By the way, I even said Z was the player of the year because I've never thought majors, they're 2 fucking events in the year. That can't, shift the balance and put a massive finger on the scale. That has to be a small detail. It has to be considered just the best event, but I can make it up elsewhere, because otherwise, again, I'm team locked, aren't I? If my team's not good enough to do anything at the majors, I could never be the best. That's why I make the point. This could have been more egregious. Imagine if Donk hadn't played for Spirit, guys. Imagine if he'd played for like fucking Virtus Pro or something. This would have been really insane then. He would have had to be like 7th or something, or 13th or something. The joke is he might not, to make Maui's extreme, Yumi's extreme case, he could even play the same and maybe be 21st because he wouldn't have any placings. Anyway, I think we've exhausted that one.
I mean, looking back at 19, I just pulled it up pretty quickly. I mean, Simple had an overall better rating than ZywOo. In majors, he had a better rating, and in major playoffs, he had a better rating.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Maui. Do you know why even I say Zywoo was the #1 player that year? Because the eye test said he was. He was so fucking dope in big playoff games and clutch at the other tournaments that weren't the majors, and he looked fantastic. In fact, I won't fucking go do the whole thing because I've just done a massive rant. I'm going to do a video soon. I actually think a mad underrated take is, I actually think early Zywoo was better than this Zywoo now. That's why I think his team's what helps him. Mate, he had none of this like indecision and weird choke factor early on. He used to just be a stud early on and just fucking balled out and went for all the games and won every clutch, it felt like, and carried every final, every semi. So if Simple ever had a bad tournament, it felt like, God, this guy is actually sort of eating your food, mate. He's getting ahead of you. Anyway, speaking of eating other people's food, why don't you get lovely, delicious Factor meals delivered to your house that are chef prepared, dietitian approved, put together with all the right ingredients, unlike a HLTV top 20 list, even though I do feature on that piece of content too, where I'll sort of argue that's okay. But anyway, that's what it's in personal preference. And at the end of the day, what is food about if not personal preference? So obviously this is brought to you by Factor. Now, what's great about Factor is they do care about the ingredients, the quality, etc. So they've got like lean proteins, colourful veggies, whole food ingredients, healthy fats. Because one thing they understand, by the way, is even though you might look at the meal and think, oh, it's just like a microwave meal, they actually have a thing with Factor where it's like chilled and they don't freeze it. So they don't wreck if you don't know, freezing things and then microwaving them like destroys the nutrients in them, etc., and makes them like lesser quality. And unfortunately, famously, microwave meals actually anyway, no matter what it says the meal is, tend to use very, very cheap ingredients, and they don't source for quality because their logic is you just want it to be fast and quick, don't you? What's cool about Factor is they've done essentially like a gourmet premium version of having a meal that doesn't take long to prepare and you can just get into and enjoy. So it's actually kind of like the best of both worlds in that regard. They have no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners, no refined seed oil. So if you care about any of the health things or you're any of those tips, you've got you covered there. And they have all sorts of different meal profiles and setups so they can support your goals and schedule. So you can have healthier eating, calorie management, more protein. I mean, one of my favorites is I like any of the ones they do. It's got like a little Asian vibe to it. It's got like a little sauce in there or something. Actually, one thing I think is underrated, I'm somebody who normally hates vegetables. One thing I like about Asian food in general is I think it's the best cuisine for pairing the right vegetable with the right type of meat with the right sauce. And then what you do is you learn to just eat it all because actually it all goes well together, even though separately maybe you don't like, I don't know, mushrooms or garlic or onions or something. It all blends together in a way that makes a melange, doesn't it? So it is always fresh, never frozen, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no stress. You just pop it in and you're eating good already. So head to factormeals.com/snake50off and use code snake50off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purpose. Make healthy eating easy with Factor. There you go. Masterful, wasn't it? See, I'm eating good. Now let's go on to the last point of the show, which is, of course, mine. And my point is actually quite a simple one. You know what, boys? Fuck it, we'll stay with the HLTV Awards theme. I did have a different one, but I'm going to switch it up. This one is better, though, because the first two were sort of low-key flaming HLTV. This one isn't their fault at all. This is actually, it's an award, but it's actually more about what the community and pros think. And I know you will both have interesting takes on it. So I'll actually make my initial comments not insane, and I'll let you guys get in, and I'll see if there's anything I want to add in afterwards. So basically, it is Coach of the Year and how we determine it and what we think and the perception of Coach of the Year. So obviously, at this point in time, Mezzi's done it, Apex has done it. Everyone in Vitality are so greedy, they not only win all the events and all the prize money in the Grand Slams and the majors and all the other awards, and Zywoo gets Player of the Year, they also now want Coach of the Year too, an award that none of us can tell what you do and is always an approximation. And basically, as I said on Twitter, it's either a vibes or a narrative award. Like, I'll tell you the real reason really quickly, Apex, why X-Stars, for most people, isn't the Coach of the Year, even if he won it at that award show. Because he doesn't have the history that he built the whole squad. He doesn't have the history that he was instrumental in, like changing something about a map or a style of play or developing a player or so. Unfortunately, all of his competitors have that. Like, people know Cyclone built MOUZ. And in fact, to this day, most people, as the HLTV Awards would show, think MOUZ doesn't have an elite player. But look at the results they get, mate. They outplay teams like Spirit. You go and you look at someone like Mara. If anything, Senzu getting benched helps Mara's case, because then he took fucking controllers and he was still fucking around in some playoffs and doing things that you shouldn't think were possible. Like, if you want to go off vibes and narrative, and Halley, by the way, the reason why people like me and maybe Maui think this guy's the best coach is because he's in every motherfucking video. They can't stop talking about the impact he is having and the idea he dictates what goes on in the team. The joke is, nobody really gives a fuck that Chopper was fired from his job, even though he won IM Cologne, by the way, because everyone thinks Halley will just implement the same shit with Magix, who isn't even an IGL. So to me, if you notice, if you're at Vitality, notice what I just said there. I just explained to you how to get your coach to win the award. Feature him heavily in content, showing him game planning, showing him explaining to the team, showing him bringing the new player in and saying, I expect these things from you here. What even fucking Falcons tried to do with Zonic, by the way. Have players in interviews not go, oh, it was Apex that called that. Well, it was a nice call by Messi. No, say, Extras warned us they might do a 2-3 setup on Mirage and that way. These are the things that build the narrative, because we're all, when it's coach, boys, we have a hard enough time with IGLs that we watch play. We're just guessing what the coaches do. We all are. And so none of us can really know who the best coach is. By the way, I'll just say this as well. You can't either, Messi. You have no fucking clue what Ali does, mate. You're watching the same vlog I do. You don't really know if he's better than Extras or not. You don't know what Mara does. You don't fucking speak Mongolian, mate. So I don't... Because here's the last point I'll make, and then I just want you guys to just take it wherever you want. The last point is this. The Ziwu one I can at least vaguely get, because he was very, very excellent and he's a really good superstar player. Eventually, this is the same problem I had with Old Astralis. Every single player of a team can't use the trophy to justify their placing, otherwise suddenly everyone is the best. Like, it can't be that Zimu's the best because he won all those tournaments in high placings. But simultaneously, Messi must be the best because he also won all those tournaments. And simultaneously, Apex must be the best IGL because he won all those tournaments. And do you know what? You won't believe this, but you know Rops won all those tournaments. Yep, he's the best at his role. And do you know what? That means the coach is the best because he won all the tournaments. Eventually, them all being the best, just like I said with Ziyu, actually degrades from the idea that one person was the best at that thing. Because surely having the best at all roles except one makes it easier to be the best at your role. So similarly, I do think it's a problem with the whole Coach of the Year thing, because since Coach of the Year is the one that we have the least information on, I'm sorry, even though people will say, even FaZe did the gesture of saying Robban should have been nominated. The idea of winning everything just means you're the Coach of the Year. I know that is how people think in sports, but I think in CS it's just a much looser correlation. I'm sorry, I'm probably still going to go off vibes and narratives because I can't just give it on trophies. What do you think, boys? Go wherever you want with this.
I do think, especially if you look at someone like Vitality, it does seem like they refined their game a lot. And you know, is that the coach? That again is the whole question, because there are some coaches that are the analyst as well as the coach. They create the game plan as well as anti-strat the teams, and there is some. I think if it was an award for best coaching staff of the year, I feel like that would eclipse or like encompass more things. But just to say the coach, yes, unfortunately, I do feel like there is only you only really have the metric of did they build the team and did they win things? And I don't think that those are necessarily good accurate metrics, because even if the examples you gave earlier of, you know, Cyclone or Mara, you know, Mara did build the team from the ground. He's been a day one with Blitz to actually craft this out of the Mongolian circuit, and Cyclone pulled a bunch of players from the academy team. So I do think, you know, these personalities, these bigger coaching personalities like Halley or Ash or Blade, for example, you know, these people have garnered enough acumen and enough respect within the community that, yeah, I do agree. You know, most people are going to look at Chopper being replaced and think, well, there's still going to be a lot of Halley's DNA all over this. So, yeah, I don't really necessarily have new places to take this aside from the Coach of the Year. Unless they're more forthcoming themselves and potentially leaving their team vulnerable based on the words that they speak, then we don't really have enough evidence to support any any real case outside of what we see from the outside.
By the way, what you're hinting at there, I even agree with you, me. I would rather just say, fuck it, let's just win every trophy, but never put a behind-the-scenes vlog where people could get a clue about what we're doing. Because I actually do think, by the way, listen, Hallie doesn't actually really understand much English if you saw that interview you did with Order Pixel. Don't worry, they're not listening to this. They hear it all through fucking translated Telegram messages anyway. But I actually think, even though I love it, I think they give way too much info to those Spirit vlogs, mate. They just tell you who's making the decisions and what they said. It's wild. Like, I actually think it's crazy that escapes containment. If I was Vitality, I'd just say, look, it sucks for you, Xtaz. You're not going to win Coach of the Year, but let's just keep everything secret and win everything. Who gives a fuck, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't know, by the way, this even sets up Maui, a discussion we had when we did that IGL discussion 2 episodes of Hot Take Point made ago. One area where Kassad is a bit of a traditional boomer is Kassad does think that, like, if you're at an LXCB, you can't be one of the best IGLs because you didn't win any trophies. So I guess his logic would be Cyclone could never be Coach of the Year. He didn't win any trophies, even though to me it's like, yeah, but he didn't have Ziwu and fucking Robs, did he? Like, what's he supposed to do? Where are you at on this one, Maui?
Well, first off, I voted for Cyclone as my Coach of the Year.
Good.
I don't.
Think about the IGL change he had too, bro. That was amazing what he did this year. It's bonkers.
I mean, I rate Brolin as one of like the bottom 5 IGLs of the top 20.
Imagine when that move happened, Shui kicked out, Brolin, by the way, we all thought was temporary. If you told me at the end of the year, you're in finals and you're in every semi, holy fuck, bro, you must be a god as a coach. That's the narrative, right?
Well, even also just the eye test of watching MOUZ play, and after a timeout, how much they needed every single time for Cyclone to jump in. I mean, when they took out Falcons, or took down Falcons in the group stage at the Budapest Major, Cyclone practically saved all of his timeouts till the very end and called all of them. Almost every single time they lost a round, he called another one, fixed it up. So some of that is a bit of paying attention, and I will be honest, I don't think I can always pay attention every single time a coach calls a timeout, and I don't always think that the after timeout win stats are convincing because there are extenuating circumstances. Like, I mean, I think the team with the better players is more often going to win even after a good timeout. Even if a good coach calls a good timeout that has a good plan, the guy that has the better players on his team will probably win more by virtue of him having guys that just carry out whatever they want to do or just hit another headshot that upset a plan that was arguably better. I'd say that also when it comes to these kind of discussions, I think that in the moment of winning and being on the path to winning, I think players are the most honest about who they think is contributing the most. And I feel like there's always a lot of revisionist history amongst winners as they try to bestow credit upon everybody that was even remotely part of their organization as they were carrying out winning. I went back through a lot of the Austin interviews, especially ones during the playoffs, to hear what people were saying on Vitality. Nobody's saying a word about Xtaz. I went through their Katowice win. I went through all of the interviews that they had around that event, both on broadcast and HLTV. Nobody mentions Xtaz once. Yes. They all cite Rops as being the difference maker. Yeah. So how am I going to give credit to a guy that you guys don't even give credit to? And now after the fact, after they realize there's a little bit of contention with this, they now think that it's up to them to do this sort of damage control PR that, oh, no, by the way, Xtaz was helping us, but it just slipped our mind in the moment. No, that's not how Na'Vi operates. That's not how Chopper or Spirit operates with Holly. That's not how MOUZ operate with Cyclone. They know in the moment who helped deliver them the victory, and they give credit to those people. So when I hear after 2022 that Robin should have won Coach of the Year for FaZe, maybe guys should have mentioned his name a single time, like literally once, because it didn't happen. Nobody said a word about him, and that's why I gave credit to Blade in that year too. And I know that this is a very subjective way of grading this, but if you just want to give the award of Coach of the Year every single time to who has the most trophies, there's no point in even giving an award. Yes. Like we don't need to do this. If there's no subjective judgment and everybody just has the same criteria, I think this is a fruitless effort, and we probably shouldn't even be having this discussion. But obviously, coaches, they bring different elements to the table, and I think it's I think it's actually in a way lightly unfair that you are pitting somebody like Mara or Cyclone against an Xtaz, because Vitality have a wider structure for how they carry out their team. They have managers, general managers, they have all these different people that are actually working together to give a winning team or get trophies. And as far as I know, XHAS isn't really a part of bringing in all of the staff, making the roster move. But as far as what I know about Navi and what I know about the Mongols and what I know about MOUZ, those guys have more responsibilities. So I also give credit to the guys who have more of a burden, or more, they have more that they have to do for these organizations. And the coaching job isn't uniform across different teams, but neither does the award doesn't have to work under some sort of parameters where everybody's graded by only what very narrow aspect. I am going to give certain people more or less credit. Like, for example, I would not give, even though Hooksy won a lot of trophies as an IGL, we all know that Nico is a great secondary caller that gives a lot to those teams. So I am going to give Hooksy less credit. That's how this works. It's just how and it's also, I think that I guess that this conversation, I listened to Talking Counter with and Yanko holds that position a lot, that Rawband should have won in 2022. I feel like there's been a little back, and it's not like we're directly talking to each other about this or anything like that, but it is just kind of my stance on that still to this day, and it seems kind of unnecessary to bring it up now, is that FaZe can still win the major with Eddie standing behind them. I don't really think that Robin actually contributed all that much in that year. Like, and they never talked about him. He wasn't there when they won the major. I'm not going to give it to him just because he had the winningest team that year. It just doesn't, that does not compute for me.
This would be a much easier conversation if, like you were saying, Duncan, in traditional sports, it's almost always the manager or the coach of these teams that is scrutinized to the highest degree as well, because they've got more than just the 5 players in the server to dictate. They make substitutions all the time.
Ask for signings, all sorts of shit,
Yeah, they ask for signings. They're responsible with putting people in the right positions on the pitch or on the court. And so it's a lot more easy to sort of look at the tangibles of what that coach or manager brings to that system versus the coach in CS, where honestly it should almost be a thankless job. I think in MOBAs it's easier as well because they're probably more in charge of the draft, and there's a pick and ban, and does this guy get one priority, or does this guy have to play shit support roles? There's a little bit more actual definitions, but Counter-Strike is everyone has a gun, everyone's in the server, and there's far less control that the coach can dictate. Valve even made sure that themselves by making it so they can't talk during the mid-rounds and constantly whisper into the ears of the in-game leader. So, I'm not even necessarily sure that there should be a Coach of the Year or more, because like we've been saying, I just don't think there's enough evidence around it aside from content, interviews, whatever.
All right, what? I'll give you an angle where I think you could figure it out. I think if you made players vote, but they can't vote for their own coach, I would love to see who would win then. That would be interesting. Or IGLs or something, I think that's the closest you could get to a... Because I think they would guess someone like Ali or someone like that, or Amara. I think they would have picked someone like that personally.
Sure.
Because I do think Robban's the best example, because here's the problem. Surely the Robban one is the same as Xstars. The problem is we've given a lot of the credit to Apex. That's why he gets to be the IGL of the year automatically. We give it to Carrigan in FaZe. If anything, in FaZe, don't most people think the genius of Robban as a coach is getting the fuck out the way? Sometimes not coaching to allow the team to play that more loose. So the problem in this case, as you say, is we have no idea what Xstars did do.
It's difficult, and I feel like for me, it's my criteria is ever evolving. It's one where I every year have to sit with it for a little bit longer than I do. Certain ones like opener of the year are pretty easy. I mean, opera of the year is usually pretty easy. I did think about it a little bit this year just because Zai was more of a hybrid in my eyes, but he was just so far and away beyond anybody else that was even in the category as an overall player that I decided to hedge it towards him. But an anchor of the year, similar stuff, I would say. But yeah, no, coach of the year, I just don't think it's as simple as some people have it, but I don't think that my criteria is perfect either. I think that there could be some inclusion. It's kind of like the responsibility that the coach has. I do think the winningness after timeouts when they have an equal buy should be probably factored in as like a statistical sort of metric to grade them lightly. But a lot of it is just perception, and a lot of it is a PR campaign for for orgs, and I've even said this before, probably on this very podcast, that it's actually probably in Spirit's best interest to not make vlogs that are so beneficial to Holly's image, because it gives him negotiating power, as many people think that he is the best, one of the best parts of Spirit behind Donk. So I also think that it makes him more likely to be poached if any other like imagine there's like a team that's Russian speaking but has Falcons money. Why would they not just instantly poach Hallie? You're actually doing yourself a disservice to give that guy as much credit. But that's why I really in the moment focus on when Moses directly asks Apex after winning against arguably their best opponent at the major, what did Hallie or what did Xtaz do for you guys at this major, and then just calls him bald and goes on to praise other people from the staff. That is in the most winning. That is like you're almost celebrating your greatest achievement, and then you decide to downplay what the coach did. I too will downplay what the coach did for you.